All right, everyone. Can everybody hear me okay? Do I look okay? Do I look good? Do I sound good? Do I smell good? Am I good? Give me some feedback. What's up, Obnoxious? How you doing? Everybody listen, do me a favor. Open another tab and make sure you give a subby to a subscription on YouTube to The Obnoxious Anarchist. Excellent anarchic praxis, excellent theory knowledge, excellent organization knowledge, excellent direct action knowledge. Obnoxious Anarchist, please give them a subscription. Um, it's something that first occurred to me on a whim. And then, I keep saying I was going to get to it. And I said, you know what? Tonight, no time like the present. No time like the present. So, we're going to watch my videos. We're going to watch my videos from the first year of uploads. And, we'll talk about them. Try to give you a little bit of background. What's up, Stan? All right, folks. So, let's jump right into it. Because there's more of them than I thought there was. Some of them we might skip through for brevity's sake, since some of them I get a little long-winded, but let's jump in. So, I had been saying for a while that I wanted to do some kind of creative outlet that also reflected my political views. I dabbled in music for a long time, since I was probably 11, 12 years old. I mean, well, even before that, since like first grade, I took classical piano lessons, but dabbled in electronic music using digital synthesizers and such since my early teens. And I dabbled in it off and on ever since then. And so when I started getting the idea of making a channel, I said, I want to make all the music myself. I don't want to bother with having to license music, and I didn't have a lot of money to pay people to commission, and YouTube's royalty-free music is garbage, so it's really boring. And so I said, you know what, I should just start honing my skills at making better and better songs, and who knew that it was something that I would grow to love again. And it was last year, actually, during COVID, and a little bit before. I had already planned since like the beginning of 2019 that I wanted to do something on YouTube, and then some highly publicized evidences of police violence happened in the United States, and so I had decided that I really wanted to get a black voice out there in the leftist space. It was something that was sorely missing. Something that was really sorely missing in the leftist sphere was some more black voices. So that's what I wanted to do. Initially, we were in the heart of COVID, and I saw a lot of people just getting it dead wrong. Not on the left necessarily, but it's like COVID was just bad. And I happen to be a bit of a history buff, so I remember reading all about the Spanish flu. Spanish influenza that had absolutely rocked the United States, and for all we know, we very well could be on our way to burying as many people as we did with the Spanish flu. So I was getting video clips together and historical documentaries, and my first video was going to be, the idea, the framing was that we should have learned a lesson from the Spanish flu all the way back in the early 1900s. Otherwise, we would have a much harder lesson to learn with COVID-19. That being said, then the uprising in the spring and summer of 2020 happened, and I sort of reframed it, and I realized that what was going on right now, at that time in Minneapolis, echoed some very real racially charged riots that had taken place in Cincinnati some years back, almost exactly 2 decades ago. And that was my motivation. So I uploaded my first video. I wrote and uploaded my first video. The audio, scuffed. The video, scuffed. The script reading, scuffed. The lighting, scuffed. Everything was fucking scuffed on my first video. And yet I had uploaded. This video would later be featured by some other content creators during that time, and it helped me gain a number of early subscribers that I really appreciated. So we're going to watch my very first scuffed video together, and that is a city, a riot, a lesson. That was a video that I made about what had happened in Cincinnati and how it echoed what was happening in Minneapolis at the time and all over the country. So let's watch this very, very scuffed video with the screen I was reading the script off of, reflecting in my glasses, garbage lighting, trash camera.
Ready to start eating healthier? Meet Ka'Chava. Ka'Chava is the world.
I'm Carr. Let me tell you a story about my city, a story about a riot, and a lesson that needs to be learned. The story is familiar to those who live here. For those who don't, in 2001, an unarmed black man named Timothy Thomas was killed by a white police officer who was chasing him. At the time, this was the 15th black man to have lost his life at the hands of the police in a 5-year period. The community was outraged. They took to the streets and demonstrated to show that they were willing to stand up to the tyranny of unjust law enforcement. The police did what they do best, and they did what they're doing now, and they escalated things to the point of violence, tear gassing and spraying protesters and demonstrators. In response, the demonstrators took out their frustrations on the very city that had abandoned their communities.
I'm not going to stop and pause and commentary too much, but as you watch the video clips from this news documentary, notice how very, very familiar the actions of these police look compared to what we've been seeing lately. And this was 20 years ago.
And the police that had targeted them. There were public demonstrations, there was civil disobedience, and there was property damage. They were tired of being treated as an underclass and their lives not being valued. They put their suffering on display for the world to see, and our spineless corporate shill of a mayor did what he did best. He hid in City Hall, he blamed the community for the brutality visited upon them by the police, and did little else. All of his changes to the police department were cosmetic at best. Later, when he left office, after the boycotts and the protests had left the minds of the most Americans, he opted to sell out his city to corporate interest and shrugged his shoulders at the plight of the financially struggling black community. He created an organization that operated outside the purview of city council and the Democratic.
And that last clip there, so you know, that woman was literally speaking to a news reporter standing almost a couple blocks away from any noted property damage, and the cops shot her with a rubber round in the chest while she was talking to a news reporter.
Process and handed over the revitalization of the Central District, where a lot of these protests occurred, to corporations. Now you see communities where the liquor stores, the greengrocers, the corner shops, the bodegas, and all of the familiar elements of these neighborhoods are gone. They've been shuttered and they're replaced by dispensaries and brew pubs and tap rooms, diners. The black tenants are forced to move out of the dilapidated apartments that were left to crumble by absentee landlords due to spiking rents, only for them to be sold to developers and morphed into expensive condos for hipsters looking to do the urban thing. As a new, younger generation of wealthy white professionals start moving back to the city and the downtown area and the central districts, we are watching stadiums and music venues and big citywide entertainment events take place, while the black community again gets left behind. They are still being put out of their homes. They are still being killed at the hands of the police. The gentrification is now expanding to outerlying communities, and more eateries and big box grocery stores are moving in as the rents are skyrocketing, and these black residents that live there have no recourse other than to move out. So here we are. Recent events have brought the black population who are tired of their lives being devalued at the hands of the state back to the streets, and the police are gearing up and doing what they have always done, acting as an arm of the state's monopoly on violence. The story I told you about my town is not unique to my city. You can see this and similar stories in every major metropolitan area across the country, which is why more and more protests are springing up. This frustration will be felt coast to coast. I want the police chiefs, the sheriffs, City Hall, the mayor, and all of the wealthy investors to learn the lesson from this that was ignored last time and take it to heart. This will keep happening again and again. You will watch the oppressed class rise up and burn your materialist trappings to the ground. You will watch blacks who are tired of their lives being taken by the unjust hierarchy that is the police force, and they will come to the streets. Until you prove that black lives matter to you, that the physical, mental, and material well-being of blacks in your communities matter, this will keep happening. A note on demonstrations. For those who are remaining safe at home, that is fine, and you need not justify your reasons for not taking to the streets. Know that there are things you can do to help from home. Monitor, transcribe, and post transmissions from police scanners. There are apps widely available for free, and this can help demonstrators. Donate to monetary bail funds for the demonstrators who are taken into custody. If you are close to the areas of demonstrations and can safely do so, perhaps offer your space as a safe shelter if the demonstrators must quickly disperse. Offer up black clothing, masks, helmets, heavy-duty gloves, milk, apple cider vinegar, bottled water, and portable snacks as donations to the groups. Do not organize anything digitally on your phone, Google Docs, Zoom, WhatsApp. These things can be subpoenaed. Please use paper and physical records and burn them after. Stay safe and powerful, comrade. To the wealthy elites in my city and cities all over the country, I implore you, try to learn a lesson this time.
So I had not actually completed a song I was happy with prior to uploading that video. And so I used an old medley of songs that I had thrown together years ago as the background music. So, yeah, that was, I wanted to, one of the things that's near and dear to me is the fight against gentrification. And gentrification played a big role in that Cincinnati uprising of 2001 because basically that mayor took his corporate cronies after all that happened there, and his solution was, well, we just need to gentrify this neighborhood and then there won't be any more problems with the black people there. Essentially, he just kind of whitewashed the whole neighborhood. So that's an ongoing fight that we're not really winning here or in major cities across the country. I had already identified my color scheme by this point in
Recent
my
events.
video production, and yet I would go on to ditch the metallic part. I really loved this metal texture that I had, but I just couldn't find a way to better work it in, so I would later make some tweaks to the logo and stuff. But yeah, going forward, moving right along, as you can see, with a lot going on in the news, I had a lot of inspiration of things to talk about and things I wanted to get off my chest. So one of those items was people talking about property damage. A lot of people wringing their hands about property damage. So I had something to say about that in defense of property damage. Well, fruit bats, it's interesting you mentioned that. The eyeball zone hit my channel when that was my only video uploaded. Unless if I recall correctly, eyeball zone hit when that was my only video, my only scripted upload. I could be wrong.
Recent events have led to public demonstrations, and some property has sustained damage or been destroyed.
Looters smashed their way into the store. They set fires, and now we're hearing at least 200 people were arrested.
So now I want to talk about it. On the surface, I can understand why the concept of property is something that we hold close and personal. Our things, our stuff, our junk, these things belong to us, and we assign a part of our identity to the things that we own. This attachment is so significant that we look at our things as an extension of our physical being. We have not just a responsibility to protect our property, we have a right. We have property rights. Except that most of what I just said extends far beyond reason. We expand the concept of property rights to include material needs at the expense of others. We use it to exercise significant levels of social control and turn property into a currency of sorts that puts power into the hands of the people holding the property. Oftentimes, when using the term property, we tend to be talking about buildings, residences, businesses. When we say that somebody owns property, we usually mean that they own land with a structure on it. These structures can have a lot of uses, but the most common usage is housing. Now, one can see why we'd be very possessive and protective of the concept of property when it comes to housing. We see housing as home. We see it as a place where we live, a place where we're safe. We make memories there with family and friends. We cook meals, we eat, we sleep, we raise children and dogs. The truth is that people in society with the most power and influence don't see property or housing in this fashion. 37% of households are renting their home. This means that 37% of households are residing in a property that legally does not belong to them and exists purely for the profit motive of the owner. 74% of the rental properties in this country are owned by individual investors. So while I'd like to make this a problem of evil corporations, the fact of the matter is that this is a system that allows people to own and sell a human need for the sake of profit. There is also a sizable chunk of the population, something to the tune of 6 million people, who are housing insecure. In other words, on any given day, they may not know where they are going to sleep that night. So the legal institutions reinforce this right that these property owners have to their property, especially when it comes to kicking people out due to financial hardship. When one of those who are renting their house are no longer able to monetize their labor to fill the bank account of their landlord, the landlord gets to exercise their rights to the property and make their residents homeless. Why do we never question the right to own and commodify shelter, but we balk at the idea of making shelter a human right? Multiple studies have shown that it would be better for the mental and physical health of the homeless if we just gave them homes first, and then began addressing concerns such as employment, addiction, and mental illness. Oh, and for those of you who need to hear why it's cheaper to give homeless people homes, do you bend over and jerk it into your wallet daily, or do you just pull up your bank account on your computer screen and spank it real quick? You think there's a Rule 34 about this? So experts have said that it would be less of a drain on the taxpayers to subsidize the housing for the homeless, as opposed to subsidizing their future hospital bills that come about as a result of sleeping on the ground, or future law enforcement expenses whenever those who swore an oath to protect and serve are sent to go bust up encampments and further kick down at our most vulnerable members of society. And why does this keep happening? Why do we support this? Something must be done. Housing the homeless at taxpayer expense would be cheaper than our current system. And yet, 6 million people go to bed without a roof over their heads every night, while 16 million homes currently sit empty in this country. Most of those homes aren't even owned by landlords or rental companies. They sit in the hands of banks and speculative investors, waiting for the markets to shift so they can sell them. The only reason we can't just give these homes to people that need them is that it is potentially more profitable for these homes to sit empty than to just relinquish them for the public good. Recent events have led to the unemployment rate reaching 20%, and if people aren't even able to afford food, then they certainly can't afford rent. Other countries, in response to the ongoing pandemic, issued rent holidays and loan payment forgiveness at a national scale, or provided no strings attached monthly stimuli so that the majority of the population could afford to stay safe at home and weather the outbreak. But of course, that goes against the American philosophy of giving property rights priority above all else. In the years prior to the pandemic, the discussion was centered around immigrants and refugees, whether we have a responsibility as a nation to provide asylum to refugees, the necessity of building a physical wall on the border, and the moral implications of locking children in cages, all for the crime of crossing a line in the sand. You've probably even heard some of these common phrases from some of the worst people you know, like, well, your house has walls, or how would you feel if some people just came into your house and said they had a right to be there? Yeah. And have you ever thought about how weird...
Sweet pea, you all are far too kind. The video has slightly better resolution because at the time I was alternating between using this webcam here which is technically 1080p but has garbage resolution, or using a DSLR camera that could record 11 minutes at a time. Very fun. At that time, I hadn't owned a teleprompter or decent lighting, and honestly, at times I still hate the teleprompter. I feel I can read I have a lot of trouble with teleprompters. They're tricky. I need to practice it more. But another thing I don't do as often, I don't have running video clips in the little side box as often. I thought I wanted the box to be a mainstay feature. At the same time, it's a bit busy, but it is a visual element as well. So who can say?
Weird and incredibly entitled someone would have to be to equate the entirety of the continental United States with the personal property that you or I live on. Like, you understand that other people live on this planet. This doesn't even begin to cover how inconsistent the application of property rights have been to minority groups since the founding of this nation. To this day, Native Americans have to constantly fight for some semblance of autonomy over their ancestral lands. In 1921, white mobs didn't care a whole lot about the property rights of an entire affluent black neighborhood in Tulsa. They burned it to the ground, and no reparations have been made. Heck, up until the 1970s, there were still large parts of the country where you could refuse to serve black patrons because it was your property, your right. This argument has resurfaced, except that now it is about gender. Most Western libertarians will tell you that property rights also include one's physical self, yet still oppose the bodily autonomy of women or the right to gender confirmation for transgender persons. So we absolutely cannot ignore the historically racist, classist, and sexist underpinnings of this concept of property rights. Property rights have only ever been a constant for the ruling class, and just like in feudalism, in mercantilism, and now in neoliberal capitalism, the ruling class gets to decide what is property and who owns it. We've twisted this concept of property rights to not just extend to the personal property that we own and use, like your toothbrush, your guns, your car, but expanded it to include commodified amenities that are necessities for survival in the developed world. And this isn't by accident. This is by design. Neoliberal capitalism demands it. Think about it. Why can't Americans just be given the medication that they need? If someone needs the medication to live and they can't afford it, but we oppose providing this medication free of out-of-pocket expense, we are basically saying that we value our tax dollars over the lives of fellow Americans. In the wealthiest country on earth, we have people who die of starvation, die needing medication, die of exposure, die of a virus because they can't lose their job, and have cops point firearms into a car with children in it because of stolen property. We have several states that defend the right to gun down 2 teenagers for walking into your garage. Sorry, castle. All because of property. This isn't normal thinking. This is a death cult mindset. So you can excuse me for not really caring a whole lot about damage to property. The worship of property rights is very much America's property, and I think it's about time we damage this concept, if not destroy it outright.
Disa, mine's a take on the Pan-African flag colors. Pan-African pride. So, yeah, I realized when I was writing the script, I went through the whole script and didn't reference how this intersects with policies that are often abused, like the Castle Doctrine. So I added that in at the end. Moving forward, the one good thing I'd like to say is I feel, my quality's increased over time. One thing early viewers of the channel would notice, I had a lot of issues just because I didn't have any decent speakers or microphones or headphones, was kind of keeping the music at a good level behind the narration. I like to think I've gotten a little better at that. It's something I put a little bit more work into with every upload. But, I'd prided myself on rapid fire uploads, very short, punchy, straight to the point. So a lot of these early uploads are kind of things I had on my chest for a long time politically that I felt someone needed to take some time to talk about. So that's where we are at with that phrase, the good guy with the gun. I live in a state that has a fair amount of conservatives in it and is what many people consider to be gun friendly. So I've always wanted to sort of push back on that good guy with a gun myth.
Hello, I'm Carr. I want you to think for a second. What does a good guy with a gun look like? On paper, the idea of a good guy with a gun is hard to argue against. Americans using their Second Amendment rights to protect themselves, their property, and their country from a tyrannical government. In practice, it's more of a sick joke. Breonna Taylor, a first responder with no criminal record, was literally sleeping in her bed when Louisville, Kentucky police, serving a no-knock warrant, forcefully gained entry into her home. Fearing a break-in from unidentified armed individuals, her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, opened fire towards the police. One of the officers sustained a non-life-threatening injury. Breonna Taylor sustained 8 bullet wounds to which she later succumbed. Kenneth Walker was then arrested and held in custody for attempted murder. At time of writing, the charges against Walker have been dropped and the cops who killed Breonna walk free. Amber Geiger was a police officer who, upon returning home to her apartment complex after work, exited the elevator on the wrong floor and went to what she believed was her apartment. The door was unlocked and she walked in. Botham Jean currently occupied the apartment on account of the fact that it was where he lived and she was on the wrong floor. Geiger then proceeded to shoot Botham Jean dead, unarmed in his own apartment. Philando Castile was driving with his girlfriend and child in the back seat. He was pulled over for a minor violation, and a scared white cop asked Philando to fetch his ID before executing him for reaching for it. Amantic Fitzgerald Bradford Jr., legal gun owner, responded to shots being fired in a shopping mall in Hoover, Alabama, by readying his personal weapon that he owned legally and guiding bystanders to safety. The police officer who arrived on the scene opened fire against Bradford, fatally wounding him, even though he was not the active shooting suspect and had not opened fire on anyone. The police proceeded to give changing stories over the following week regarding their justification of their execution of Bradford. Jamel Roberson was a security guard at Manny's Luxury Lounge, a nightclub in a Chicago suburb. Earlier in the evening, there had been reports of gunshots after a fight had broken out in the club. Roberson had drawn his legally owned firearm and detained one of the suspects involved with the shooting when the police arrived, and despite bystanders at the scene shouting to the responding officers that Roberson was in fact security staff and his clearly marked security uniform, the officers opened fire on Roberson, fatally wounding him. It should be noted that this took place after a mass shooting incident in Pittsburgh where a shooter at a synagogue killed 11 people, and the cult leader himself openly suggested that more people should start carrying firearms for protection. Need more? Okay. A 38-year-old black off-duty officer with 11 years of service was inside his home when he overheard police outside responding to a crime in progress. Some car thieves had reportedly opened fire on police and wrecked the stolen car before fleeing on foot. The off-duty officer grabbed his service weapon and walked outside to assist his brothers in blue. Initially, the 2 officers at the scene wanted to detain him, but recognized him as a peace officer and asked him to approach. Another white officer who recently arrived on the scene didn't recognize the off-duty officer and, fearing for his safety, opened fire, wounding the black officer. His wounds were not life-threatening. Citizens in this country celebrate a dangerous myth. The idea that you can be the good guy with a gun while living under the unjust hierarchy that is the American state. The state holds a monopoly on violence and exercises it through their military, their cops, their mercenaries, private military contractors, and their prisons. In the eyes of the state, the only good guy with a gun is the one wearing the badge or the uniform. And in the social media sphere, there are plenty of bought and paid shills, ex-cops, and useful idiots ready to heap love and praise on cops and give their killings of Americans the seal of approval. Where does this idea come from?
The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
That's Wayne LaPierre, Vice President of the National Rifle Association. That quote, they sell it on t-shirts, they tweet it, they repeat it. And yet the NRA always falls curiously silent when a black man is wrongfully shot by the police, by those same guns that they lobby so much for every citizen to own. The NRA sure loves to bang the drum about good guys with guns who use their guns in defensive situations or stop mass shootings in progress. And you better believe that whenever a pro-gun control candidate at any level of government speaks up, they'll be there to virtue signal about how they are fighting the good fight to stand up against government tyranny. That said, It is a little odd how quickly they will support the one demographic in this country that performs the most confiscations of firearms. I don't know, maybe because they make quite a bit of money running licensed training programs for police who make up a sizable portion of their membership. Hey, why are street-side executions carried out by police never considered government tyranny? Wouldn't that be the sort of thing that the NRA would want to stand up against? Why does the NRA support and provide training to police agencies across the country who are the ones who actually confiscate guns, often disproportionately from minorities? But we'll get to that point. Yet talk about politicians in suits who are going to come and take your guns.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47.
I seriously doubt Beto O'Rourke or Hillary Clinton is going to show up at your house and snatch your Bushmaster. So calm down, Mr. Operator. The reality is that the NRA historically does not enjoy the idea of an armed black populace. In 1967, a group of Black Panthers were escorting Betty Shabazz, the widow of Malcolm X, to the airport where they had a tense but nonviolent standoff with airport security and San Francisco police officers. They dutifully informed the officers on the scene that they were exercising their Second Amendment rights to carry their firearms and were breaking no state or local laws as their rifles were not concealed. 6 weeks later, the Mulford Act was introduced, a bill prohibiting anyone outside of law enforcement officers from carrying loaded firearms in public. This bill was introduced by Republican Don Mulford of Oakland and backed by the National Rifle Association. Later, it was signed by Governor and future Republican President Ronald Reagan. Black Panthers, led by founder Huey Newton, opted to protest this statewide ban by marching on the State House, armed with their rifles, while the state assembly was in session. Their rifles were taken by Capitol Police, emptied of ammunition, and returned. They then left the Capitol, roughly 30 minutes after the
Yeah, I remember this one went out of sync.
Later,
a bit,
Ronald
I
Reagan
think.
would come out onto the State House lawn to meet with school children and was heard to say that it was a ridiculous way to solve problems. Wonder what he would think of this. Also wonder why the NRA sees this as okay, but not this. Man, it's almost like their history as an organization is inconsistent at best, and at worst shows a notable leaning towards lobbying and the profits of firearms manufacturers. If you've been keeping score, actual good guys with guns, even ones who support the rights of all citizens to bear arms and reject gun control legislation, are often targeted and even killed by the same people who believe that good guys with guns stop bad guys with guns. Now, none of this is to be seen as me advocating against blacks owning guns. On the contrary, as the Republican Party continues to curtsy to the spray-tanned fascist in the White House, and the Democratic Party opts to continue making these Bush League moves in the electoral politics game, now, more than ever, blacks need the means to defend themselves and their communities. Make no mistake, there are people in this country who are eager to ignite a race war, and they usually look like this. And the Venn diagram between people who can't wait to drop all pretense and start indiscriminately killing minorities, and the people who subscribe to this American cowboy fantasy of being a heroic lone gunman, is pretty close to a circle. In the eyes of the state and the corporatocracy, there is no good guy with a gun, and it's getting more and more obvious who the bad guys are.
So with that one, I was pretty happy actually with the script on that one. It felt very punchy, and I tried my hand at making some jokes. My style is very deadpan and with delivery, and that's even the way I was when I used to dabble in stand-up comedy. But my editing was suspect back then, and yeah. The Good Morning I'm watching on incognito. That way you only see what other random plebs would see. All right. So this is one that I had made called What is Gained. This is referring to rioting because people were asking. I heard a lot of the similar sentiment coming back around, asking about what was gained from riots, and I felt that was a really stupid thing to say, and showed some lack of knowledge of history. So.
What happened?
Baby, I'm so sorry. Found him flushing these.
I'm Carr. Let me ask you something. Are you familiar with the concept Scuffed of audio,
5-day work weeks, the 8-hour workday?
Are you happy that at the age of 10, you weren't sent off to go work in a mill or a factory? Do you have black friends, or black coworkers, or even a black significant other or spouse? Are you allowed to get married? Do you have children together? Do those children get to go to school with other children who don't look like them? Are you gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, transgender, asexual, or intersex? Do you lie in bed awake at night in fear that an ambulance will show up to your house and drag you off to the mental ward? Are you not a man and therefore unable to vote? No? Oh, and here's the big one. Do you have to swear fealty to a crown? All of these social improvements may have involved council meetings, ballot initiatives, Supreme Court rulings, or acts of Congress, but they started with riots. What if I told you that on March 5th, in an American major city, a group of laborers, small business owners, and concerned citizens took to the streets to protest against the presence of armed agents of the state? Those government agents called in backup, took up more arms, and in response to thrown rocks and snowballs, opened fire on unarmed demonstrators, killing and wounding a number of them, only to later get off with laughably reduced sentences. In case that sounded a little too similar to what's going on right now, I should inform you that this was the Boston Massacre. It took place in 1770. Sorry, I forgot the year. I think that it is a failing of our education system that we so often miss the important details of major societal changes and movements. When we are taught history in school, we are only given this vague understanding of these movements, knowing little more than the dates and that some people gave some speeches and then some benevolent white men signed some documents and everything was fixed. We get the impression that the activists, who we now know are on the right side of history, were viewed that way at the time. The reality is that the people fighting for progressive movements were often mocked, demonized, and subjected to state violence. In 1913, a women's suffrage parade took place in Washington, D.C. Drunken men were in town to attend the presidential inauguration the following day, and they began to jeer and taunt the female demonstrators as they walked down the street. Then, large groups of men began pushing into and shoving the women marching, storming onto the parade route, and burning them with lit cigars. The police failed to protect the demonstrators, and the ensuing riot required military troops to be brought in to restore order. A hearing was held, and the D.C. police chief was dismissed for negligence. This boosted the movement that would later lead to the passage of the 19th Constitutional Amendment. Stonewall was a gay bar in Manhattan, and also refers to an uprising that came about as a result of the LGBTQ+ community growing tired of having to pay off cops to keep their clubs open and prevent state violence from being visited upon them. They would later draw allies from the anti-war movements and the civil rights protesters of the early 60s. Led in part by a black drag queen named Marsha P. Johnson, this was a multi-day riot. There were Okay, so I do want to pause that. That's an interesting history lesson right there. Throughout their life, Marsha P. Johnson identified as a drag queen. I was corrected in the comments of the video saying that it's accepted that Marsha P. Johnson was a trans woman, but this was not a term that was in parlance. And I don't like to necessarily use the terminology that we would later utilize to describe someone who is gone that's different. I don't want to change the terms of how they identified themselves. Marsha P. Johnson identified as a drag queen, okay, while she was alive. So that's the terminology that I used in this video. It wasn't a gaffe or a mistake on my part. I knowingly chose to use the term drag queen as opposed to trans woman because that is how Marsha P. Johnson identified. Now, that we could argue whether it's right or wrong to do so. I believe, though, that if somebody used that title at the time, then that's the title that I would use. Interesting thing to think about with regards to history. Cop car windows smashed, buildings set on fire. They took their fight to the street. Oh, Blaine Hoover, absolutely. She's not a trans icon. She is the trans icon. Make no mistake. and in defiance of the hypermasculine cops and their phalanx configuration, locked arms and formed a kick line and sang show tunes to square off against government thugs. God, that's awesome. By the way, the first gay pride parade happened after that, and ultimately led to the first gay and trans rights bills becoming law. Let's go back to 1886. Workers all across the colonies had been striking for several decades to push for an 8-hour workday, but what turned the tide of the labor war was when on the 3rd of May, thousands of workers went to confront strikebreakers at a plant in Chicago. The police arrived and, cementing their status as a tool to be used against organizing, opened fire and killed 4 people. The next day there was a rally to protest this violence. A bomb was detonated in Haymarket Square. Labor activists were rounded up en masse and imprisoned. A number of the movement leaders were tried, convicted, and hanged. 2 years later, the American Federation of Labor decreed that American workers should work no more than 8 hours a day. The next year, this would become endorsed as the official date for demonstrations around the world, now known as May Day. On a side note, it's almost as if cops aren't allies and have no place at labor or pride demonstrations. But where was I? Oh. The Civil Rights era, from 1940 to 1971, was marked by so many incidents of civil unrest I won't be able to list them all here. Just know that it took black activists being beaten, hosed, attacked by dogs, and gassed, and even killed in the streets, before in 1964 the Civil Rights Act was signed. And even after that, many more black leaders would continue to lose their lives in the ongoing struggle against white supremacy to this day. Anything, and I do mean anything, that challenges the social, political, cultural, and economic control held by the white ruling class will be met with suppressive state violence. And at that point, the only tool that can cut through and affect real
Oh, thanks for the like, by the way,
change
Ben.
is
Appreciate
civil
you.
disobedience.
Hi, I'm Dr.
Used that old song medley again because I didn't have a song together. It was at that point I said that I really need to make sure I had a new song for every video. Terrorist and infiltration,
I'm
something
sorry.
that's not talked about
What
enough.
if I told you that a spiteful, violent, terrorist ideology has infiltrated our American society? That multiple groups under the umbrella of this ideology have taken it upon themselves to attempt to gain access to the very foundations of law and order that we trust to maintain the peace. These groups want to sneak in and plant the seeds of destruction and chaos, spread propaganda and twisted praxis, and encourage more and more violent conflict among the citizens of this nation. No, I am not talking about Antifa. I am talking about white supremacist organizations and the police. What is the largest and most deadly prison gang in the United States? You may be inclined to think of MS-13, or if you were alive in the 80s and 90s on the West Coast, the Crips or the Bloods. In fact, the Aryan Brotherhood holds the throne for the sheer size and brutality in the American prison system. This is a hardline white supremacist criminal organization that dates back to the 1960s, coinciding with the desegregation of federal prison systems. White supremacist organizations have a long history of inconsistency in their practices and ideologies, and the Aryan Brotherhood was one of the pioneers of this trend. While outwardly claiming to be pro-white and anti-everything else, they were often involved in the manufacture and distribution of heroin, often to white communities. Their notorious profit-seeking behavior oftentimes led them to collaborate with Mexican and Colombian criminal organizations. They often trafficked heroin and methamphetamines to other white people within their own communities, fueling addictions among the same whites that they claimed to be protecting. In addition to looking for any reason to attack minorities with extreme prejudice and brutality, they often enacted violence against other whites for being race traitors. The prison industrial complex will not make a concerted effort to curtail the influence of this organization. In fact, the correctional institutions will often benefit from the presence of criminal organizations in the prisons as they serve as a form of enforcement and control. Let one group run the yard, give them a little bit of influence, and that's less work that the prison guards have to do. Of course, you know what would also make for less work for prison guards? Putting less people in prison, you stupid. These groups don't just exist in the prisons. Many historic organizations like the KKK and the Daughters of the Confederacy have existed in society for over a century. Oh, and yeah, the Daughters of the Confederacy are definitely still a thing.
They're the mothers of the lost cause myth, and Karens aren't a new phenomenon. The Charlottesville rally showed us that plenty of plain, everyday, khaki-wearing white men with 401ks and tiki torches were more than ready to take to the streets and spread their dangerous nonsense. And despite all of this, much like in the prisons, law enforcement agencies at the city, state, and federal level have little incentive to take action against a perpetuation of white supremacist ideology. Even though many of these organizations claim to go against the establishment, they don't actually prove much of a threat to law enforcement. Arius, right. No, I don't have a Discord. I have a Reddit profile where I share stuff, and I'm car_YZ, and on Twitter as well, car_YZ, and just subscribe to the channel. But, you know, you can email me if you want to talk to me. I love talking to people. In fact, there has been evidence to suggest that an infiltration of white supremacist groups into law enforcement is occurring across the country. Oh, and if you think that this is something new or out of left field, it comes from an assessment by the FBI, dating back to the Bush administration. White supremacist groups seek to foment chaos and racial disharmony, which they would then in turn use to carry out violence against minorities with impunity. Embedding themselves in law enforcement agencies give them further power to do this. This also, sadly, isn't new. Failed rock star wannabe Charles Manson painted divisive phrases on the walls with blood at the site of his murders in an effort to cause a helter-skelter or race war. Nowadays, you have white supremacist bad actors attempting to escalate the peaceful protests against police brutality in an effort to start a boogaloo. White supremacy is baked into the very power structures that make up the unjust hierarchy of American society. It is a threat that goes all the way back to the founding of our nation. So when you watch the news, wondering how an institution that claims to protect and serve could be so capable of such cold indifference and disregard for communities of color, remember that we have dangerous terrorists in our midst. I would say, I'm trying to figure out where there's a point where the overall quality of the channel would have jumped. Yeah, Sweet Pea and the Good Morty, you're absolutely correct in that these were far from perfect groups, and they did do some active efforts to keep down a lot of the blue-collar black workers who weren't allowed in their unions, and they were often adversarial with them. Next one is another video I think that needed to be talked about a great deal, and that is just how pervasive and how big of a problem the police unions are. It's not something I saw a lot of people talking about specifically, so I made a video and kind of a clickbaity title. I called them Bad Comrades. It's obvious cops are not comrades, but I call them Bad Comrades because oftentimes they enjoy some of the strongest union presence. In some areas, they have the strongest union protections of any other industry, oftentimes even in states with very strict right to work laws and things of that nature. They get some of the most protection and help from their unions. From time to time, we have to examine our beliefs, our ideologies, and our praxis. I am no exception. As a black anarchist, I am forced to fight an uphill battle to bring my ideas into public discourse, going against both the neoliberal capitalist establishment and the white supremacist power structures that feed off of it. After all, the left doesn't have fossil fuel billionaires to signal boost us. The end result is that we have a strong tendency towards solidarity. We ultimately want our movement to be as large as possible. As such, we associate with a lot of mechanisms that are an essential part of class consciousness in our war against unjust hierarchies. That said, as I mentioned at the beginning of this pretentious preamble, we need to deconstruct our relationships with some of these concepts, as difficult as it may be, and identify the bad actors that have also utilized the tools of the proletariat. Oh yes, I'm going to talk about a bad union. Out the gate, I need to set the tone for what I'm going to be discussing today. I am talking about unions that are bad in the sense that they are detrimental to society as a whole, and an enemy of the working class. I will not be engaging with everyone's bad union experience anecdote, because as proven with overwhelming evidence, unions are categorically good for the workers they represent, and the wide-scale decline of union presence coincides nicely with historic levels of wealth disparity and wage stagnation that we are now experiencing. So, if you are typing up that my bad union experience comment, save it, scab. Recent events of police brutality have led to some police union leaders coming out and making, we'll say, tone-deaf statements.
In the black community, mothers are worried about their children.
Seriously, fuck this guy so hard. Like, you all need to watch this whole speech from this dude, the head of the PBA. They let this ignorant motherfucker say this shit, and this whole speech just gets worse and worse from the goddamn clip that I'm showing here. You gotta listen to this guy. It's so ridiculous. It's almost funny how blockheaded he is. Anyway.
Getting home from school without being killed by a cop. What world are we living in? That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen.
Now, I've known for several years that police unions exist. In many areas, they go under the name of Fraternal Order of Police. My first job in high school actually was a telemarketer doing cold call solicitations for FOP fundraising. What I've learned over the years, and what many are just finding out, is that FOPs and police unions have unprecedented levels of influence, stretching far beyond the labor conditions and salary of peace officers. They have put an illegal, banned chokehold on city and state governments and sway public policy. So it would help to know how we got to this point. In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in 1915. Hey, adorable autonomous monkey. Thanks for commenting. Thanks for watching. Of their local police bureau in May. Oof, too soon. And established the Fraternal Order of Police. This was the creation of the most influential law enforcement union in the United States, even though, due to anti-union sentiment at the time, and the fact that they were oftentimes weaponized against labor organizers, they opted not to brand themselves as such, even if that is how they operated. The newly minted FOP brought grievances before the mayor and city council that they felt were being ignored. 3 years later, they would go on to become a national organization. Any elected, appointed, or full-time employed law enforcement officer of the United States was eligible for membership. A great many lodges also have provisions in place for retirees. In 1920, some of the wives formed an auxiliary of the FOP for family members. Another auxiliary was later formed for associates that weren't eligible members or the family of members. Now, this auxiliary was a 501c3 tax-exempt organization, and it has friends, politicians, businesses, and other citizens among its ranks. That was, by the way, the group that I solicited for in high school. The FOP wrote a constitution stating that race, creed, nor color shall be no par. Yeah, no, they really wrote that with a straight face. And, it's funny given... Aside from their anti-strike policy, which hasn't even been enforced for over 50 years, on the surface, one would see their fundraising and advocacy for better working conditions, salary, and legal representation as an example of a durable union doing what it does best, improving the lives of workers and protecting their livelihoods. Things become a little bit more sinister, however, when you dig a little deeper, and this is where it hurts me a little bit. Probing my own general support for organized labor, examining my socialist leanings, while also being critical of a massive and really powerful union. But we can power through this together, because I'm all out of nice things to say. The FOP established their reputation of shielding police forces from accountability in the 1960s, following a nationwide push for police review boards. This came after a solid decade of state violence and brutality being used against civil rights demonstrators. This also coincided with the abolition of Jim Crow laws across the country, many of which were enforced by those same police. The FOP saw these calls for oversight as a sinister government movement against law enforcement. It is around this time that the ACLU would come in and become a longtime rival of the FOP regarding the topic of police brutality. The FOP at one point called them a liberal attempt to discredit law enforcement, which is a little odd. So I don't like this video that I made. It was early on when I was working with kind of a makeshift teleprompter, and I was having a lot of difficulty reading in an even cadence from it. I was losing my place a lot, and I also think I may not have been at my personal best when I recorded it. So that's the only reason the video took as long as it did, is because I was talking so much slower. They are apolitical, and I can be critical of the hills they choose to die on. Oh, I forgot one. In 2016, they endorsed the Republican Party candidate Donald Trump for U.S. president. I should have led with that. In 1991, FOP President Dewey Stokes said that Rodney King's brutal beating at the hands of police was the result of stress on the job and the media's exploitation of the negatives of law enforcement. The FOP vocally supported the death penalty for political activist, journalist, and former Black Panther Mumia Abu-Jamal, earning them condemnation from Amnesty International. In 2018, the FOP chapter in South Carolina vocally objected to Angie Thomas's award-winning novel, The Hate U Give, being added to a high school summer reading list due to depictions of police violence. This doesn't even get into the professional atmosphere created by the presence of an organization like the FOP. They often foot the bill on expensive legal counsel for officers facing criminal charges. The FOP and other police unions have pressured lawmakers into limiting the powers of prosecutors investigating misconduct. Anytime officers are fired for misconduct, you better believe that regardless of the reason, the FOP will be right there, ready and waiting to come out and vocally condemn the democratically elected leaders of cities and towns. And it's really easy to fall into their trap. The police have positioned themselves as the physical embodiment of law and order. The way they spin it, if you are critical of police, you are anti-police. If you are anti-police, you are anti-laws. If you're anti-laws, you're pro-crime. You don't want to be pro-crime, do you? You are a law-abiding citizen, aren't you? You don't want to have packs of criminals roving our streets, threatening good people like you and me. What, you want to divert funding from the police department towards violence prevention programs and initiatives? Why would you want to do that? Certainly you and your constituents wouldn't like it if we weren't able to respond to your emergency calls in a timely fashion. Where was I? Oh. In some cities, police unions have even pushed back against federally mandated reforms, which is often the only way that changes get adopted. The Cleveland Police Union president stating, "Every time a kid points a gun, he has to do a use of force investigation. Now guys aren't pointing their guns when they should be pointing their guns." Which, first of all, yes, officers should be pointing their guns at people less often in general. Secondly, they are afraid to do the thing they always claim to do when they fear for their lives because of paperwork. Thirdly, this is a really tone-deaf phrasing, given what happened the last time a cop in Cleveland, Ohio, an open carry state, by the way, came across an actual kid pointing a toy gun.
That doesn't happen.
Remember earlier when I was memeing about police unions acting like mobsters pushing a protection racket? Well, they also have their own code of silence. This doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of how comfortable the FOP and police unions like it have made cops with the knowledge that they won't be held accountable for their actions. Minneapolis PD Union President Bob Kroll, who has called protesters a terrorist movement and has at least 29 complaints against him, praised President Trump for putting the handcuffs on the criminals instead of us. He was elected in 2015 in response to the appointment of a reform-minded police chief. In the face of accountability, the unions dig in their heels. So despite all of that and their lack of solidarity with other labor organizations and cops' long history of violence targeting labor movements, I just don't know where this leaves me. Police unions are a problem, but if you ask me, a socialist, if I'm ready to start the ball rolling on the dissolution and abolition of a union representing public servants, I still don't know. It's hard. I just don't know if I'm ready to foster an anti-union sentiment. Hopefully, though, at the very least, we can condemn the actions of these bad comrades. Thank you for watching. Follow me on Twitch, where I stream video games and give lectures on different subjects. So, at the beginning, I used more ambiguous phrasing. The world would be a much better place without the police unions, so burn them to the fucking ground. We can do without them. So that was when some of my videos started to get a touch bit longer. The next video I made was one that actually did pretty well. In terms of videos, it got a lot of response in the comments. People liked a little bit of the fun framing device that I had in the beginning of this video. It's called I'm Tired. At the time, my video titles were maybe a little bit more vague, something that I would go on to change, but it was just about arguments that we really shouldn't even be having to entertain anymore.
Black people commit more crime. More white people are killed by cops than black people. White privilege isn't real. All lives matter. Blue lives matter. What about black on black crime? White people have been oppressed too. Not all cops are bad. If they just followed the law, they'd be fine. Why can't they just peacefully protest?
It's not even that I can't answer them. I can. I can't answer them as I have so many times. It's that I'm tired. I'm not tired of making the videos. I like making these videos because I like taking the opportunity to make people think and deconstruct our commonly held beliefs on certain topics. But I never set out to make videos about commonly debunked arguments and things that we have been telling people over and over and over for years. And I have been on Facebook, Twitter, on Discord, on YouTube comments, nonstop, around my coworkers even. It's tiring and exhausting to have to keep answering the same arguments over and over. Okay. Once more for posterity.
Black people commit more crime.
Crime follows desperation and a lack of material conditions being met. Blacks in America were subjected to 400 years of slavery, 70 years of Jim Crow, and 40 years of redlining and restrictive covenants. Not to mention that black neighborhoods have a much higher police presence and are policed more heavily. More police present, more arrests will be made. This was pushed into overdrive in the 80s and 90s as broken windows policing and stop and frisk policies basically gave the police carte blanche to patrol the most impoverished neighborhoods in America, seeking out crimes to prosecute. Crimes in black neighborhoods also tend to be better documented in the media and the news.
More white people are killed by cops than black people.
Perhaps less people in general should be killed by cops. Wouldn't that be nice? That said, this is the epitome of a bad faith argument, as it shows that someone would be willing to forego even the most basic critical analysis to silence black protest. To answer the comment though, more whites are killed by cops overall than blacks in America because, surprise, surprise, blacks are a minority. There are more white people overall in the US population. There are 200 million non-Hispanic whites in America and 40 million blacks. But there is also this neat little thing that we learned how to do in middle school economics class called scaling up to per capita, allowing us to see that for every white killed by the police, 4 blacks are killed by the police, despite there being 5 times the number of whites in the population.
White privilege isn't real.
So this one seems really difficult for white people across the political spectrum to grasp. White moderates get particularly triggered by this phrase because they see themselves as race neutral or colorblind, and more on that later. What's up, Delph?
They get very uncomfortable at the thought of being privileged if they've worked hard for their accomplishments and don't display overt racism, the kind with robes and rebel flags. The problem is, that's not what white privilege means. The best way for me to explain white privilege is a series of examples of varying severity and impact. On the more lukewarm end, blacks have a harder time finding skin and hair care products readily available at most retail stores. And on the hair front, in my city, it was just made illegal in 2019 to have discriminatory hairstyle policies in the workplace. And yeah, my first job in California in 2014 explicitly banned dreadlocks, cornrows, or other twisty styles of hair. From a cultural and community standpoint, most whites are able to share an inspiring story of how their ancestors came to be in America. You'll hear stories about Ellis Island, see pictures of immigrants from across Europe, desperate people with big dreams, and tales of their homelands. You may have had a grandparent growing up who spoke the native tongue or knew old world cooking recipes. Well, I don't know when my ancestors came to America. I don't know how they got here, although I can take a guess. I don't know what part of the African continent they came from, what their names were, what language they spoke, what gods they worshipped, what tribe they were a part of. Their cultural history was beaten out of them. Ever since, blacks in America have had to pick up whatever fragments they could scrape together of their heritage and rebuild their culture anew, just to be mocked, copied, and ultimately plundered. Think about this at the next St. Patrick's Day, Oktoberfest, Cinco de Mayo, or heck, Independence Day. White privilege doesn't mean you aren't suffering. It means that your skin color isn't adding to your suffering. Oh, and I've left out the biggest and most pervasive bit of white privilege. Whites in America have had a 300-year head start on owning property, voting, and influential roles in the workplace and government. One of the biggest predictors of future wealth and success is property ownership, and this was an American dream deferred for blacks. Yeah, they should, but historically they haven't. Blacks have suffered a disproportionate amount of violence and brutality at the hands of the state. This is why we say Black Lives Matter. It is a reminder, not an exclusion. The phrase All Lives Matter, along with Blue Lives Matter, which I will get to, I promise, literally came about as a response to blacks demanding justice for police brutality.
Blue lives matter.
There are no blue lives. Seriously, blue lives aren't a thing. There are blue jobs. Lose the uniform and you are a blue life no longer. There, see, I saved you the trouble. The occupational hazards of potentially getting shot, killed, or hurt while working as a cop is just that, part of the job, a job you willingly took. You can take off the badge. I can't take off my skin.
Many of those killed had prior criminal histories. They were no angels.
Yes, and I've been reading into a number of these police-involved shootings, and I see 2 patterns. First, none of their priors carry the death penalty. Trust me, I looked into the penal code, and you can check for yourself as well. Secondly, they all have prior convictions, not just charges, meaning that they were arrested, tried, and convicted for their prior crimes. In other words, our pathetic excuse for due process took place. Do you think that the cops are correcting some egregious injustice by killing this person? Also, there are plenty of cops actively working who have had DUIs and domestic violence convictions on their records. Should this same warped sense of justice be applied to them?
What about black on black crime?
Black people aren't killing each other because they're black, just like whites aren't killing each other because they're white. Black on black crime is about on par with white on white crime. If you're going to be killed, it's going to be by somebody who looks like you, statistically speaking. Hey, why do you only bring this up when people are complaining about police brutality? Are you implying that there must be a zero violence within a community before someone has the right to decry violence at the hands of the state?
White people have been oppressed too.
Yeah, by other whites.
It's almost as if the concept of whiteness is rather inconsistent and has been used as a tool of oppression for centuries against a variety of groups. But while white people have been oppressed, we currently stand on the corpses of natives, and our president lives in a house built by black slaves. Let that sink in. Yeah, I know, but if a bad
Holy shit. Adam Chancellor, good to see you, aka Bruce Leonard. Listen, everybody, open up another tab when you get a chance, and go over to the Caption This with Rob Buscalari and Bruce Leonard, and give them a subscribe when you get a chance. If you're watching on Facebook, be sure to shoot them a like and a follow. Excellent comedian working out in the Las Vegas area. Good to see you, man. I really miss you. Thanks for tuning in.
Cop exists and the good one does nothing, then they aren't really good, are they? Hey, I don't want to punish good cops. I just want a system that allows us to remove the bad ones immediately. If only there was a way to know which ones were bad. Breonna Taylor was shot in her bed while sleeping. Elijah McClain was stopped for walking to the store to get an iced tea before 3 cops held him down, cut off blood flow to his brain, and then EMTs literally drugged him to death. Tamir Rice was a 12-year-old playing with a toy gun, and a cop shot him 4 seconds after getting out of the car. But none of this actually matters because I thought that we were supposed to have a system of due process. Are cops following the law when they act as judge, jury, and executioner on the side of the street? This is a particularly insidious phrase because given the history of black protests, even the peaceful ones often end with violence being enacted upon the demonstrators by the state. Someone may share this picture of MLK walking, locked arms and singing in a march, but leave out the part where that march ended with him getting arrested and the demonstrators getting gassed, beaten, and fire-hosed. Blacks who staged sit-ins in segregated diners had drinks poured on their head and were spat upon. The Little Rock Nine, teenagers who were just trying to get an education, I remind you, had to be escorted into school by the National Guard. Also, most of the times the protesters aren't the ones who escalate things, as seen right here in my hometown of Cincinnati. Seriously? Be better. Really? That's terrifying, because you are incapable of recognizing the experience of every black person in this country then. You've created this mental utopia where everyone has equal experiences and nobody is treated differently because of the color of their skin. And leftists, pay attention as well. Race may be a social construct, but it is one that has been forced on people of color and wielded against them like a bludgeon to kick them down the social ladder. We can talk about a post-racial world after the wrongs of racism have been righted. Until then, it is nothing more than a fantasy. This is getting old. I'm tired, but not as tired as these arguments. Thank you for watching. Follow me on Twitter, where I expose the dangers of the white moderate.
Who are those people?
I also have a Twitch, where I stream video games and give lectures. And if you are so inclined, I have a Patreon. Thanks again.
So, yep, for those just tuning in, I am going over my first year of uploads here. I gotta say, I'm actually happy with that video. I like that video a lot. You know, if I reshot it today with a better camera and a better mic and a better understanding of editing, it honestly would come out pretty similar. I think it landed very well, and it was one of the ones I was really proud of because I thought that it was a good response to a lot of these garbage arguments. Love to share that with others out of the AJ context. We'll talk about that, Skyless. I might play it. Depends on how the stream goes. We'll see. Onward to correct another myth. The myth where people talk about how hard of a job cops have. So I made a video called A Dangerous Job.
Hey, I'm Carr. Lately, I've done a lot of complaining about capitalism and state violence, and other really negative, heavy subjects. So this time I wanted to take a moment to pay my respects and honor the bravest men and women of our great nation. They suit up every day and go to work at the deadliest job in America just so that we can continue to live in a society and enjoy the peace and freedom that comes with living in this blessed country.
Now please rise to honor and celebrate our heroes as they stare death in the face to provide a better world for us. Give it up for the logging workers. Logging workers. Wait, what? Surely there must have been some kind of error or something in my notes. Hold on, let me check. Nope, it's right there. The highest rate of fatal injuries in the civilian occupations per 100,000 full-time workers belongs to logging workers. Huh. Ain't that something? Honestly impressive considering that they're wearing suspendies the whole time. Well, certainly we can't help but take a moment to honor the second deadliest job in America.
I am so mad that nobody picked up on that Monty Python reference in the comments.
Those stalwart defenders of our way of life, let's give it up for fishermen. Huh? Okay, let me just scroll down the list here. Lumberjacks, fishermen, aircraft pilots and roofers, garbage men, truck drivers and delivery drivers, farmers, structural metal workers, construction workers, and landscapers. Apparently, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, those were the top 10 deadliest jobs per 100,000 full-time workers. Okay, I'm done having fun. Let's get to the point. So you've no doubt recently heard, in response to calls to defund or abolish the police, this common rebuttal. They have a dangerous job. You hear this constantly. Society has painted police work as this sacred calling, brave warriors standing up to unspeakable horrors and the darkest manifestations of evil on the battlefield of the city streets. Whenever a police officer dies in the line of duty, it's not uncommon to see an oppressively large procession of first responder vehicles forming a parade to the cemetery. This makes it all the more weird that I've yet to see a dead truck driver make the front page of the newspaper or have local news anchors providing the times for public viewings of a lumberjack. This is despite the fact that more truckers die in the line of duty than cops nationwide, by several orders of magnitude. Why aren't we celebrating the lost lives of loggers, truckers, and delivery drivers? Well, society hasn't been conditioned to portray them as heroes. Now, normally, I prefer to work with thought experiments and examine the greater logic behind societal ills, but this time I wanted to include some hard data to shed light on the realities of American police work, as opposed to the mythos. I want to explore this a bit deeper and get an idea of just how dangerous police work is. The numbers show us the truth. The reality is that a pizza delivery driver technically has a higher chance of being killed in the line of duty than a peace officer. So, according to the FBI, 9 law enforcement officers were killed in the line of duty in 2019. Of those, 48 died as a result of felonious acts. 41 died in accidents. As you can see, almost half of the deaths in the line of duty were accidental. 35 of those 41 accidental deaths were the result of traffic accidents, either taking place in a vehicle or...
So, we want to note 2 things about this video. Thank you, Sweet Pea. I appreciate it. Yeah, at the time, I put a lot of work into always giving my beard a good combing and oiling and balming, and I love my beard a lot. It is my closest comrade. Note A, we are in sweat posting hours with this video. I am dripping sweat during the recording because at the time I didn't have a desk fan and I couldn't run anything else because it would be picked up on the mic, and it was the dead of summer at this point down in my soundproofed bunker, and so I was just dripping sweat. It was gross. Also, one of the videos where I fucked up the music audio and it's entirely too loud. Continuing.
As a pedestrian struck by a vehicle. Oh, and know that each of those cases were ruled accidental by investigations. Cases where the officers were struck by a moving vehicle intentionally is counted in the 48 deaths by felonious acts. With all of that being said, don't let my tone suggest that I don't recognize the difficulties of police work. There are many hard jobs in this world, and I'm willing to admit that
I want to stop and talk about this video because this video is in no ways police apologia, but in my explanation about how the very mechanisms of the police departments are actually pretty oppressive to their workers, you know, from a labor and a socialist standpoint, this is still something we'd want to abolish and something we want to end for the safety of these people working this job. You know, there are people that came away from this video saying that they never would have had even an ounce of sympathy for the police before watching this video. And, you know, I go into how the setup of the police departments is really nasty, even for the people working there at times. All the more reason to completely remove it as a system.
Police work is one of them, especially in our current system. Right now, police departments enjoy massive bloated budgets while resources for addiction, education, and mental health are in short supply, and those departments have to scrape to get any sort of funding. Cops are often the first ones to respond to calls of violence and child abuse. They will encounter those struggling with the deepest depths of substance addiction, those who are victimized by human trafficking, and they have to deal with the grisly aftermath of deadly vehicular collisions. So I'd never say that it is an easy job. Most jobs aren't easy jobs. There will always be an inherent challenge to exchanging our labor for currency in a capitalist system. Apparently, it's not an easy job to live with a cop either if the numbers are anything to go by. So that takes us to the really unfortunate part. The thing responsible for killing the most police officers in America in 2019 was their own hand. Nonprofit organization Blue Help reported that 228 officers took their own lives in 2019, the highest since comprehensive record keeping started.
For all of you out there, even if there's some reformists out there, defund the police people, I'm not adversarial towards you. I just want you to snapshot this frame in your mind. And when they talk about the difficulties of the job, this is true. 228 officers took their own lives in 2019. That's over double the amount that were killed in the line of duty. That's a problem. That would be a problem in any line of work. And it's something that they are failing to address within their own ranks.
Being a cop is a hard job. Despite all of the provisions that their unions make available to them, oftentimes cops have no means to seek help without being declared unfit for duty. This in turn places their livelihoods, chances at promotion, and retirement in jeopardy. And much like the way we treat our soldiers, we shower them with praise and adorations without providing adequate mental health care. I get that it's a hard job. Those numbers I brought up earlier about deaths in the line of duty were not meant to disprove that. It's just that the difficulty of the job is often paraded out as a means to hand-wave away the very clear abuses of power and lack of accountability. I know that it's a difficult job, and as defunding the police becomes a bigger part of the early steps towards a post-police world, we can use this opportunity to take some of the pressure off of the cops by redistributing their funding, giving them less to contend with, and making it so that police work is not such a hard job. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please comment, like, and subscribe.
Moving right along. Skylos, you had mentioned earlier about, I believe it was you that had mentioned earlier about my segment in that video. I would recommend that you can just share EJ's segment. EJ did an excellent job of editing everything together, and it was a collaboration. It's not really good in the spirit of a collaboration to pull, you know, my segment out of a collaborative project. So, but please feel free to go over to Non-Compete and watch his third installment in that series in which I contributed. Well, if he asks me, me and him will talk about it. Onward. Multiple people said when I titled this video The R Word, they thought it was going to be about something really bad. But this was This is a video that I'm going to be redoing, as in I'm going to take a second stab at it. I could have made even better arguments, and the audio is just garbage. So, the R Word, my video about reparations, all too short and not as well argued. So this is one, if we're reviewing old drama. No, there's no drama, Starlight. I was just saying some people thought in the comments that the titling the video the R Word meant something completely different. It's about reparations, which is kind of a dirty word sometimes.
Hey, I'm Carr. If the revolution came and went tomorrow, and we had Medicare for all, and freely available clothing, and housing, and food, and full bodily autonomy, and democratically controlled workplaces, and tuition-free college education, and a complete abolition of the police, and abolition of prisons, and gender equality, and reformed education, and heck, let's just say the end of currency-based economy, and everything else that we anarchists crow about all the time. Even after we've accomplished all that, I'm here today to tell you that we still need reparations for Black Americans.
So I made a song for this video. It's not. It's an okay song. Reparations is one of those things where if it comes up in a conversation, and sadly this conversation comes up with a lot of leftists too, I go into fight mode. I go into edgy debate bro mode. I'm ready to start swinging. I'm going to beat the drum on this as long as there is a breath in my body. So I wanted to make that sort of fast punk rock beat to say, let's go, motherfuckers! Reparations now! That's what I was feeling when I put this little song together.
Oh, you're still here. Glad you decided to stick around. With the majority of the country in support of defunding or at least reforming the police, we can no longer ignore the influence of white supremacy in our society. Right now, there are demographics in our country that are undeniably still experiencing the negative effects of colonialization. I would also speak on the current state of the native and indigenous populations or the experience of Mexican and South American immigrants, but I am woefully uneducated on a number of those topics and would not like to speak as an authority on an experience that is not my own. So instead, I want to focus on the Black diaspora in the Americas. If you are shaking your head so violently right now that your red hat fell off, please stick around to the end, and I promise I will not only argue in favor of reparations, but also show that reparations are very American and something truly befitting a developed and free nation. First, some brief history, since history as taught in schools tends to fail to show how long institutional racism has existed in the United States. After the abolition of slavery in 1865, it would be another 100 years until all Black residents had the right to vote. Even after the voting rights were officially established on paper in 1965, it would be a few more years until all of the racially targeted elements like poll taxes and literacy tests were completely removed. At this point, Black schools were still legally segregated until the Supreme Court decision in Brown versus Board of Education. It should also be noted that in the 1800s, in the United States, a series of policies were enacted collectively known as the Homestead Acts, allowing farmers who promised to cultivate the land the opportunity to move westward and seize large tracts of lands for themselves. After all, a massive country that was rapidly growing needed a bustling agricultural sector to feed the population. Curiously enough, though, due to rampant abuses, most Blacks were denied this opportunity. It should become clear the importance of land when you often hear reparations referred to symbolically as 40 acres and a mule. It was never about a handout. It was about getting the same opportunity to work and till the soil and own their own slice of the country that their ancestors broke their backs building. After World War II, the United States experienced a financial boom so significant and unusual that many experts say that it could never be repeated. Part of this was due to the New Deal policies that allowed returning soldiers to access federally subsidized loans to buy into newly built suburbs and move out of many crumbling and blighted rental units in the metropolitan areas. Oftentimes, when arguing against tax cuts for the rich, leftists will reference these boom years where there was a 95% marginal tax rate at one point, but they tend to leave out how much of the benefits of this society were not accessible to the majority of black citizens, many of whom were also war veterans. This is due to restrictive covenants or literal contracts in lease agreements and mortgages that prevented owners and lenders from ever taking on black customers. Redlining also became heavily in use at this point, basically allowing federally backed housing lenders to mark off black neighborhoods as places to deny home loans and investment. This meant that blacks in America were often left to continue living in rundown, crumbling rental units, and with little options for bettering their housing, basically lived at the mercy of slumlords in the inner city who had little incentive to make repairs or bring buildings up to code. Lead paint exposure has been proven to permanently affect cognitive and behavioral development. If you notice that a progressive policy was passed, but somehow managed to ignore the plights of black citizens, good on you for paying attention. You're going to see a pattern forming. Then came the freeways. The cities and suburbs of this now financially empowered nation were built with the needs of wealthier, car-owning suburban white families in mind. This meant that the majority of black families who were living in poor neighborhoods and therefore relied on public transit now had their already impoverished and neglected communities stripped and dissected by the interstate highway systems. And make no mistake, the highway system was intentionally built to provide federally funded convenience for white motorists, while almost walling off, if not completely destroying, many black neighborhoods. Many of the homes were taken via eminent domain or predatory business practices on the part of property developers. This happened across the country. Those neighborhoods that remained, now adjacent to a loud, ugly, pollution-belching interstate, watched as their already neglected neighborhoods dropped even further in property value, robbing the few black homeowners of the biggest indicator of future wealth. This also led to schools in their community suffering debilitating losses of funding, due to the fact that for some reason in America, we fund schools through local property taxes. If the houses aren't worth much, then the owners don't pay much property tax. No property taxes, no funding for the public school. Okay, so next I guess we need to talk about the effects of the war on drugs, crime, and punishment. The Nixon administration needed a way to disenfranchise two groups who they knew would be voting against him: hippies and black people. So they turned what had at one point been considered a fairly innocuous substance, marijuana, into a scheduled controlled substance and started the war on drugs. He criminalized minor possession offenses and incentivized municipal police departments to make drug-related arrests. It is around this time that the majority of police departments would see huge spikes in funding of their drug task forces. Then, just a sec. Okay, so then later, after the Reagan administration facilitated supplying the inner city with crack rock cocaine to fund American imperialism by trafficking drugs from South America to send money to Iranian rebels to destabilize foreign governments and lead to a more volatile Middle East and untold numbers of dead civilians, a series of tough-on-crime initiatives were passed, establishing longer, stricter sentences for the usage of crack cocaine versus powder cocaine, despite the only differences being the form it was consumed in. Oh, and the fact that whites used powder cocaine at a rate on par with black usage of crack rock cocaine. Two of the biggest and most damaging of these policies adopted by law enforcement was stop and frisk and mandatory minimums. Stop and frisk gave the police carte blanche to stop any individual to search them for drugs or weapons. This led to high levels of over-policing in black neighborhoods. Mandatory minimums established minimum sentences for a number of victimless crimes like drug possession. Sprinkle in some other pro-punishment programs like states adopting three-strike laws, racially targeted propaganda about welfare queens and super predators, and you have a majority of the black population in the United States being left to contend with a massive substance abuse epidemic, dilapidated housing, underfunded schools, yet bloated police forces given absolute power to detain and imprison residents of said neighborhoods. And now, to this day, we have wealthy investment firms swooping in to buy up neglected properties in black neighborhoods, redevelop them into expensive rentals and condos, catering to white millennials looking to move into city centers. Somehow, all of these
Delta Mail, what are you talking about? Tin hat is a big no-no. What are you talking about? The tinfoil hat was a joke to describe something that actually happened, but a lot of people deny actually happened. Delta Mill, please explain yourself.
These community investments managed to lead to black businesses and homes being pushed out due to spiking rents. Hospitals, doctors' offices, black-owned banks, and grocery stores became a scarcity in black communities. As such, black communities on average have worse access to affordable, nutritious meals, healthcare, and financial services. This in turn means that $1 spent in a black community rapidly leaves said community instead of being reinvested into the local economy. I could go on about housing and workplace bias, where applicants with black-sounding names are more likely to be denied leases or job offers. I could add that the inadequacies in access to medical care means that black mothers are more likely to die in childbirth than white mothers. I could point out that there are oftentimes wealthy white neighborhoods with high-performing, funded public schools directly adjacent to impoverished black neighborhoods. And oftentimes, school boards exact extremely harsh punishments against parents, up to and including prison sentences, for the victimless crime of trying to circumvent a racist system to provide better education for their children. Or, staying on the subject of school, show how white parents have often fought tooth and nail to keep black children from attending their majority white schools. I can go into how in the 90s most of the banks in the black neighborhoods were replaced by predatory payday lenders. I could cover how higher interest rates on student loans affect blacks on an almost clear-cut racial line. I could cover how voter ID laws and gerrymandering are seemingly innocent policies that actually target black communities with laser focus with the sole purpose of disenfranchising black voters.
Thanks, Danner. You know, you're the first person to say that's what it looked like. I honestly just shaped it over a bowl because I have so much hair and such an enormous egg head that any other shape was having difficulty staying on. So I just took several layers of heavy-duty aluminum foil and shaped it over a massive bowl so I could just plop it on and it would actually stay in place with my head movements. I didn't think it did kind of look like an army helmet. I didn't think that it was a dog whistle or anything. I'm sorry. People complimented the tinfoil hat in the comments. They said it was very robust and very nicely made.
But I think we've covered at least a primer on systemic racism. So where do we go from here? Well, it should be clear by now that the American dream is a dream deferred for the majority of black communities in America. But more importantly, if you've been paying attention, a number of the policies that have been beneficial for the working class Americans have failed to materialize those benefits for the black population at large. This is why, despite whatever policies we may get passed, whatever candidate we may get elected, reparations must be made. It's not a matter of who pays. We all pay to lift up hardworking Americans nationwide who have been kicked down the ladder for literal centuries. It's not about punishing white people, but about correcting the effects of past wrongs that are still present in the modern day. So what will they look like? Well, that is an ongoing conversation. I will go over some of the elements that I feel will be the most beneficial. The majority of the problems established earlier are the result of black communities being blocked from the means of establishing generational wealth. Many of the current models suggest a federal fund earmarked for black businesses, business grants, public schools, college tuition, housing, and property buying. I support this, as this will all be means of improving the material wealth of black communities and bringing them closer to on par with historically privileged white communities. I am not against direct cash compensation as a supplement to American descendants of slaves, but I caution against centering the discussion around that for one main reason. Direct compensation is not election-proof. Hopefully the last 3 years have shown the very real levels of damage that can be done as a result of a bad election. Lose an election to a conservative candidate, and the power structures of white supremacy will make short work of any gains. Plus, cash infusions tend to only help the recipient generation, but do little to build a foundation for future generations, whereas investing in the property ownership of Black Americans will do more to guarantee financial security for future generations. You know, unless some racists drop bombs on their homes or burn their affluent neighborhood to the ground, but I think we're working on a contingency plan for that. I would even say that reparations would be a smart move for the economy, not that that should be a condition. But multiple studies have shown that when material conditions are met, crime drops, less people succumb to addiction, and the quality of education increases. After all, you can't learn if you're hungry. And you won't need to steal if food, shelter, and healthcare are readily accessible to you. This would mean that less money would be spent on prisons, bloated police departments, and emergency medical expenses for the homeless. Oh, and in case you wonder about the dollar amount, the largest proposal I've seen yet is $500 billion to seed the fund. And if that seems like a lot of money, remember that trillions, hundreds of trillions of taxpayer money were just sunk into Wall Street this year to delay the stock market decline for a whole 2 weeks before they made any relief payments to workers. We have the money. That was never even a question. Other countries have shown that reparations can and should be paid to the victims of oppression as well as their descendants. As recently as 2017, Germany is still paying reparations to Holocaust survivors and the descendants of its victims. Finally, as stated above, I said that I would explain why I believe that reparations are not only the right thing to do, but the American thing to do. Just not the way you think. You see, there are recorded instances of reparations being paid to white Southern property owners for the loss of their property after the Civil War. Oh, and some of that lost property was human beings. Yeah, also England tends to dodge a lot of criticisms for the fullest extent of their involvement in colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade, but slavery literally paid for their industrial revolution. And yet, even in the UK, British slave owners have also received payments to recoup the cost of their lost human property. So reparations aren't something new. I just want to see them paid to the actual victims of oppression. I don't believe that class reductionism is a huge deal at the moment, as most of the leftists I interact with tend to be pretty knowledgeable of the plight of the Black diaspora. But if there is anyone in the audience still in doubt about the need for reparations, I'm going to leave you with 2 questions. Hypotheticals, if you will. First, let's say 2 people are running a race, and one of the runners was kneecapped at the beginning of the race, and they were limping the entire time. Someone finally comes in after half of the race and fixes their knees, and now they can run at the same speed as everyone else. Does this mean they've caught up? Second, having shown how many times policies that actually benefit the working class still left the Black proletariat behind, how do we know that it won't happen again with what you propose? Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe.
Like I said, good video, but I think there's more that I could say. At the time that came out, that was actually one of my longest videos. Actually, I want to say that was my longest upload at that point. A tinfoil hat competition. Where are we? I love my chat. Where are you all going with this? All right, let's see. We're moving right along here. So, this is the first and sort of my dissatisfaction with how much energy we put into arguing with people who are so sunken into conservative politics.
You've probably already heard about the health benefits of raw honey, but something very interesting happens when you add cinnamon to it.
Hey there, let's play a game. I want you to hold your breath while I talk to you for a little bit, okay?
I want everybody watching in chat to do this experiment. Hey, Narf, thank you. Everybody in chat, follow the instructions in the video. This will be fun.
No cheating. Good. Let's begin. Right now, we are watching an all-out attack on freedom.
Hold your breath.
Literal secret police are being dispatched by the hundreds and in some cases the thousands to American cities to quell civil disobedience. There has been reported instances of protesters being rounded up and taken away in unmarked vehicles by unidentified agents of the state. And I just can't help but wonder where the right-wing gun crowd is during all of this.
Isn't this their whole thing as to why they insist that they need their guns? To fight off a tyrannical government? I don't think a better opportunity could ever present itself. They certainly have no problem defending a criminal farmer and his rowdy friends storming a federal office with rifles. Aren't these guys supposed to be against the presence of big government? Then I can't help but think about other inconsistencies. This whole administration is one incoherent mess, you know? 45 came into office with overwhelming support from the evangelical Christian lobby. This is despite the fact that he is a twice-divorced, 3-time unfaithful philanderer who doesn't go to church, read the Bible, or seem to actually care very much about his Christian faith. Why would they be supporting someone so baked in all of the sins they abhor? You think that they would speak out against that? Oh, and then there is his complete lack of business acumen. As a businessman, Trump has managed to lose more money in investments than just about any other person. He has built an entire career on declaring bankruptcy, stiffing contractors, and destroying almost every venture he's taken on. Surely Wall Street and the capitalists out there would pull their support from a man who managed to lose money running a casino, lose money running a pro football team, lose money running a sham college, lost money selling vodka, and had to literally break the emoluments clause to make any money at his garbage resort in Florida. And yet, crickets from the majority of Wall Street outside of a couple billionaire pissing matches with equally garbage human beings. What about the very patriotic military supporters, right-wing parents of veterans and active-duty military? One would think that they would see his cuts to VA funding is antithetical to his campaign promises of taking care of soldiers. Heck, at the time of writing, 3 soldiers have been found dead at the same military base in Texas, and he's done nothing. The highest-ranking member of the Republican Party should be considered an absolute embarrassment, and yet he still finds people who support him. When will these people realize they are being had by an ultimate grifter? Oh goodness, you're still holding your breath. Stop. I should have mentioned that the average untrained adult human will begin struggling after only 30 seconds without breathing. Well, I guess the lesson to learn here is obvious. If you're waiting for that moment when conservatives will realize that they are being conned, don't hold your breath. It's easy to fall into this trap, spending hours of your life you'll never get back pointing out the inconsistencies.
Yeah. By the way, I did not make it 2 minutes even. Too many cigars. I've never had a lot of good breath control or lung capacity. Not in many moons, unfortunately. But I was very proud of that framing device. Moo, hey, welcome and thank you. We're going over the first year videos
of Trump supporters, hoping that they'll see the error in their justifications for supporting one of the most incompetent fascists to ever hold public office. Well, I want to caution you, because you will lose consciousness due to dangerous levels of carbon buildup long before his supporters get wise to this. I think that we expect Cult 45 will get slapped in the face by reality and come to their senses. Sadly, for the majority of his increasingly polarized base, this will not happen. I want to discuss why I feel this way. It's actually pretty easy to identify the major umbrellas of Trump supporters. To an outside observer, this seems like they are voting against their own interests, but that's just because we aren't applying a more critical lens to the bigger picture. So let's dig in deeper together. First off, the religious right. Hot take here, but if Trump is even a Christian, he's a pretty terrible one. Infidelity, divorce, gambling, and his general unpleasantness as a human being are all things you'd expect dyed-in-the-wool evangelical Christians to be against. And yet, 45 has the undying support of a large portion of the Christian community. Why is this? Well, like every other group we are going to cover, they are actually made up of single-issue voters, and to the Christian lobby, no issue is bigger to them in public discourse than robbing women and LGBTQ persons of their bodily autonomy. See, here's the thing. Fundamentalist Christians are super into enforcing outdated puritanical views on sex, gender, and procreation. Ever since the Roe v. Wade decision, they have been actively trying to reverse what they see as an affront to their delusional interpretation of holy text. They are ready and willing to overlook all of his many transgressions because they know that he will attempt to make good on his promise to criminalize abortion and alienate homosexual, trans, and non-binary persons. In the 3 years since he's taken office, more regressive policies attacking the rights of LGBTQ persons have been pushed than the last 3 administrations combined. The president and the people who are adjacent to his views are empowered to attempt to curtail the rights of marginalized people. His supporters don't care that banning abortions will just lead to more back alley abortions. They just want to throw people in jail for abortions. They don't care that LGBTQ plus persons are a part of the economy with constitutional rights like everyone else. They just want them to be too scared to exist. And don't forget that while Trump engages in anti-Semitic dog whistles, he fervently supports Israel and the fascist ethno-state they seem intent on building. And his evangelical supporters who follow twisted literal interpretations of the Bible believe that Israel is the Holy Land and as such carries great significance. Speaking of marginalized people, we have to address the very racist ambitions of the modern conservative movement. We mustn't forget that this is the president who had the endorsement of a former head of the KKK, earned a standing Roman salute from the literal creator of the term alt-right, and has appointed a dyed-in-the-wool white supremacist to his cabinet. He campaigned on a platform of specifically targeting Mexican and South American immigrants in his anti-immigration policies. He spent the entirety of his first term trying to make the country as hostile as possible to Muslims, to the point of openly calling for a ban on all Muslim immigration. On the left, we may be inclined to engage with these actions and remind people that immigration is a net positive for the economy, and the knock-on effects of ending immigration or making it even more difficult than it already is will hurt the economy in the long term. But again, remember, when he engages in jingoistic, xenophobic rhetoric, he isn't appealing to the economically literate. He's speaking to the people whose ideal America is completely lacking in melanin. So racists will love him, because he will openly push the same ideas that they advocate for, regardless of the ramifications. Finally, let's talk about that rare breed of parasite. The type of person that likes to say the country should be run like a business. The type of person who says taxation is theft. I'm talking about the wealthy. You see, wealthy people, and by extension corporations, tend to hate two things above all else: regulations and taxes. Corporate entities can't wait for the chance to go back to pushing unregulated consumer goods and not have to waste the time and resources on pesky things like worker safety or testing or making sure that our pork isn't tainted with feces. They also love giving their CEOs large bonuses but hate paying taxes. Well, Trump is their golden goose. It doesn't matter to them that he's lost money in almost every business he's started. It doesn't matter that he is nepotistic to a fault, putting his own fail sons in charge of major businesses. It doesn't matter that he is, frankly, a scrub-tier businessman. They know, thanks to his party affiliation and campaign promises, that he will lower their taxes, allowing them to siphon even more profits from the excess labor value of their employees, and further endanger said workers along the way through deregulation. So that's it. Religious, racist, or wealthy. These are the main pillars of Trump's core base. They should be pretty easy to identify. Look for the morally righteous religious leaders who wish to strip human beings of their rights and autonomy. Look for the hyper-patriotic individuals who find every excuse in the book to demonize immigrants and defend the state-run concentration camps. Look for the financially secure business owner or CEO who defends their support of a dumpy, incompetent fascist vaguely gesturing at the economy. There are so many ways that the left can engage in direct action that delivers real, tangible change. So if you're watching all of these Trump supporters, waiting to see when they're going to wake up to their own hypocrisy, honestly, I just warn you to not hold your breath. Thank you for watching. Please like.
That was a good video. I don't hate it. People are always critical of their own work. But I like that video. It was a good video. It was a good video. I enjoyed that one. All right. Let's see here. Oh, this one is the start of the... I think this one is the start of the chain of events that led to me getting banned from... r/socialism, but that's
it's time to help people customize.
Putting the cart before the horse. We'll get there. This is my take on voting, since people had asked me a lot about voting, more than I cared. So I made a video on my views on voting, and I'm still pretty much in line with my views on voting at the time.
Customize and save with Liberty Mutual.
Hey there, Carr here. I just want to say that I'm happy to see more positivity circulating around on social media with regards to the subject of self-care. I think it can be helpful for those struggling with depression or disillusionment to get friendly reminders to take time to care for their own physical and mental well-being. Even if someone is physically fit, depression can make simple day-to-day tasks like showering or
Delv, I run an ad blocker. The problem is I'm watching the videos on an incognito tab, and so it disabled my ad blocker. So, happens.
toothbrushing a chore. And actually, I want to talk to you about toothbrushing today. Medical science has shown that oral health is actually a pretty big deal and is one of the key contributors to our longevity as a species. A whole host of lethal complications can arise from prolonged poor oral hygiene. Therefore, we are taught to do it as children. It's a simple, yet very important task that we need to do. And we know we need to do it. If you maintain good dental health, that's great, but usually one doesn't expect to gain a sense of validation or accomplishment just from the act of doing so. If you're a parent or have any background caring for small children, you may have even encountered a headstrong but lovable little tot who rejects the notion of brushing their teeth as it is such an insignificant part of their schedule, they don't see the merit in performing the task. But they still need to. Because as simple as it is on the surface, you and I, as adults, realize that if this task is neglected, there are far deeper ramifications. You may not feel rewarded for doing it, but you know that it is the bare minimum to living a healthy life. Now, the sharper among you have probably picked up on what I'm really talking about here, so let's get to the point. We're going to talk about voting and electoralism. Now, as with most of our chats, I'll be speaking from the perspective of a black man living in the United States. I hope in the future I can make more videos engaging with some of the single-digit nations and their applicable subjects. That said, I recognize right off the bat that there are some legitimate cases where voting is something that could be rightly opposed from an ideological standpoint. In the case of Canada, there's at least one indigenous group whose name I don't want to butcher here, who can make a solid claim to the fact that they do not recognize the colonialist nation to whom they never ceded their land. I am sure there are plenty of examples of this across the planet. But today, I'm going to talk about non-indigenous voters based in North America. There's been some pretty heated discussions on the subject of voting, especially now as we enter yet another general election season. In 2016, progressive voters who didn't want to vote for an incompetent, senile, egocentric corporate failson were given one of the most unlikable establishment party stalwarts to vote for. This is, of course, after the Democratic Party essentially gamed the system to ensure that they could stack delegates in favor of said garbage tier candidate. As opposed to the more popular, more progressive, more down-to-earth candidate. This led to a pretty strong disillusionment with the concept of voting in general. Another problem with the presidential general election is the Electoral College. I'm not going to deep dive into the math of the Electoral College, but just know that the existence of the Electoral College guarantees that the votes of some Americans carry considerably more weight than others. This is antithetical to the concept of democracy. Then you sprinkle in some voter suppression through such fun hallmarks like strict voter ID laws, refusing to make voting day a national holiday, refusing compulsory voting and automatic voter registration, voter roll purges, and good old-fashioned ballot tampering. So when you look at the two-party system, specifically how useless the Democratic Party is and how inundated with far-right ideologies the Republican Party has become, you really begin to wonder if there is much point in voting. Well, the lesson we've learned over the last 3 years is that elections have consequences. We have a Senate Majority Leader right now who has made it his goal to completely forego doing his constitutional duty. And he is an elected official. The president who emboldens him and doesn't challenge this dereliction of duty is also an elected official. The president can appoint Supreme Court justices aligned with his ideals, and this could literally mean the reversal of rights for marginalized groups in an increasingly volatile nation. Now, I don't want to discount criticism against the focus on federal elections. As I said earlier, voting every 4 years in the primaries and the general election is the bare minimum. A large percentage of policies that are most likely to affect you in your everyday life are actually decided at the local and state level. And history has shown that direct action does get results. Minneapolis is set to dissolve their municipal police department. This is after months of protests. Kentucky has banned no-knock raids, and multiple cities and counties across the country have already begun the process of defunding and overhauling their police departments. Pounding the pavement works.
Yeah, that was an empty promise from the city of Minneapolis, looking back with hindsight, but it was something at the time that they had just announced. But you are correct, Starlight, that it did not ever happen.
Letters and phone campaigns work. Protests work. This works. Don't ever let anyone tell you that direct action is ineffective. Liberal politicians may tend to be the idiot children of the wealthy, and they love above all else status quo. When you challenge status quo, they must either change it or deal with a potential threat to their careers as elected officials. Heck, in the last 3 years, my city has all but decriminalized marijuana possession offenses, banned hair discrimination in the workplace, and banned breed-specific legislation for dogs. You need only to take to Google and look for groups organizing in your area, or find the current ballot initiatives for your city, county, and state. If you don't find the group or ballot item, well, now you have something to contribute. Finally, I'm not here to tell you who to vote for. I'm here to tell you that no matter what form your direct action takes, be it masking up and hitting the streets, online petitions, phone calls, or community organizing, find a way to contribute that works for you. And along the way, don't forget to brush your teeth. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, click the notification bell, and leave a comment if you.
And drink water. Yes, Sweet Pea. Yes, please listen to them. Sweet Pea System is right. Drink water. I've been drinking water. This is not beer. This is seltzer. Drinking water. I have another alcoholic beverage here, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So, let's see how long we've been doing this thing. All right, brushing your teeth. Normal and normal part 2. Well, I can't skip those. I was going to say maybe I got a few I can skip here, but, well, we can't skip those. So, normal was something I really wanted to say because we were seeing the horrors of the pandemic really starting to hit home, and people were really, really getting antsy, locked up in quarantine, and people were saying, oh, we got to return to normal. I want to return to normal. I'm like, hey, normal sucked. Normal was trash. Hey, iMythology, what's up? Yeah, I hate people saying return to normal. Normal was garbage. We should use this as an opportunity to make a new normal. Anyway.
Attention, parents of children who developed necrotizing enterocolitis. If your child developed...
Hey there. You know what? I look at everything going on with the world, pandemic level disease, outbreaks, foreign wars, police brutality, and all of the general chaos, and I can't help but think that I just want to return to normal. You remember normal, right? Where we didn't have foreign war, and everyone was paid a living wage. Well, before this illness, we didn't have to worry about the health of the population. Well, police brutality wasn't such a big Look, I'm Carr, and I want to make sure that we all understand that returning to normal is not an option. While I think that most leftists understand this at a fundamental level, the majority of right-wingers and centrists seem to be operating under the delusion that all of today's current problems are just a deviation from the norm. There is this prevailing attitude that all we need to do is just fix a few isolated issues and everything will return to normal. I'm going to make the point that we cannot and should not return to normal, because what we called normal was in fact completely broken. COVID-19 didn't destroy the economy. Instead, this pandemic was but one in a series of historical natural incidents that came to the surface and exposed the deep cracks in our fragile illusion of economic power. The level of wealth disparity in this country is at its highest level in recorded history. The federal minimum wage has stayed at $7.20 an hour for 4 decades. After the Reagan administration dealt the killing blow to unions back in the 80s, we now see that the average worker has less representation, less bargaining rights, and less purchasing power than the previous 2 generations that came before them. In our most populous states, both the federal minimum wage and the state minimum wage are equally insufficient to independently secure consistent housing. After the outbreak and subsequent lockdown, companies, big and small, began to shutter, showing that even in a place often lauded as a land of opportunity, we are all but one natural disaster away from the next economic recession. As soon as the workers are physically unable to continue working for exploitation wages, the corporations began to flounder. After all, it is hard to maintain some kind of financial durability and pay your CEOs inflated salaries. This is why 1 month into the lockdown, Congress couldn't wait to force through a $1.9 trillion stock market stimulus that was completely nullified in 2 weeks. I could sit here all day wondering how a system could be considered successful if it must be bailed out every 10 years. The current arguments going on amongst the worst people in Capitol Hill is centered around the idea that people don't deserve help unless they are willing to submit their bodies and minds to keep feeding the machine of capitalism. This is the normal they want to go back to. Normal to the people running our country means that Americans are expected to die of preventable illness if they can't afford health care. Take into consideration that the rest of the developed world introduced some form of universal health care back in the years following World War II, and yet while we were the only country experiencing a financial boom during those post-war years, we responded by doubling down on capitalism and protecting it as an institution for decades to come. One death due to someone rationing insulin because they can't afford it is unacceptable. Someone losing all of the financial gains they've made over several years with a single hospital bill is unacceptable. This is a society where currency is required to eat, required to have shelter to sleep, required to achieve higher learning, required to innovate or grow a business, and at every turn, the system is geared to make sure that if you weren't born into an abundance of said currency, you will fight an uphill battle to ever acquire it. This is the normal that liberals and right-wingers seem so desperate to return to. We also can't forget that despite the pandemic, the machinations of American imperialism are still going strong. The horrors of our foreign intervention didn't start with Cult 45. The 16 years that predated this current administration saw us bury 1 million people across the Middle East. Right now, we are watching the United States do their very best to instigate a coup in South America, and American corporations are joining in the pillaging of the African continent for financial gain. Earlier I mentioned how capital can't even agree on some kind of comprehensive financial relief for those affected by the pandemic, but of course we never run short of funds to assert the dominance of the American empire at the expense of millions of casualties across the globe. Back on the home front, we are witnessing the effects of a 3 decades long effort to reduce higher learning from a tool of enlightenment and enrichment of society to a profit motive. We are no longer driven to be scholars, lifelong learners, or academics. Education has been purely commodified as a means of achieving better earning potential. And of course, neoliberal capitalism was there to ensure there was an industry ready and waiting to generate revenue off of this demand. We decided as a society that a college education is nothing more than a means to slightly improve our existence under capitalism, and as a result, many are financially barred from taking advantage of what used to be considered a public good. So that age-old weapon of oppressive economies, debt, was utilized to make sure that young adults would sign away the best years of their life to financial servitude. Years of financial punishment, all for the crime of daring to pursue higher education and not be born into wealth. Oh, and we cannot ignore the long unaddressed issues of police brutality and the overall oppressive system of modern policing. The police were never a noble institution in the United States. All the way back to before the American Revolution, police were either protectors of the merchant class in the northern states or enforcers of the institution of slavery in the southern states. The internet age has made it impossible to look away from the very real and terrifying fact that Americans are being slain in the streets by the people who are sworn to serve and protect them. And now, people are demonstrating to call more attention to these oppressive institutions. The police are responding by committing more brutality and violence against the citizenry. As leftists, we need to reject this entire idea of normal. Returning to normal isn't good enough. The old status quo isn't good enough. Right now, we are in a state of flux. The pandemic has made the cracks in the foundation too big to ignore. And it is our jobs to make sure that no politician, no corporation, no venerated institution gets to continue to exist without fear of reprisal and condemnation from the disgruntled masses, be it direct action by way of rent strikes and mass strikes, walkout sit-ins, marches, ballot drives, or commandeering town hall meetings. We must continue to amplify our voices to show the powers that be that we will redefine normal and not allow them to return to the unfair and oppressive systems we had before. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe.
So I'd say that the normal videos, both of those, I actually like how they came out pretty well. I'm going to skip the part 2 one. It's a lot of the similar points. Then we'll get to, early on one of the videos that actually performed really well at the time. A little background in this video. Actually, it was inspired partially by a quick line that American Johnson had made in one of his videos. And, I looked at some of the math and I'm like, yeah, no, it's absolutely right. Winning in the game of capitalism is not easy. It's all up to chance and the odds are not in your favor. Incidentally, I was really inspired by this video and I did a lot more visual stuff, used a lot more visual props in this video than I had before. And honestly, than I have ever since. Basically having to record 2 different videos. Hey, Blaine, thanks. So, and in that process, I wanted to, we're getting there, Sweet Pea. Yes. I wanted to make a really good song. And it was around this time that I decided, due to many comments, people asking about getting access to the music that I use on my channel, that I wanted to make the music from my videos, make the music from my videos available to everybody. So I actually worked on really hard on a song, and a lot of people liked the song in the video a lot. It was a weird little dubstep thing that I did with some strings and whatnot. And maybe I'll play a little bit of the song. I would go on to upload the soundtrack from this video, and it's the only soundtrack that I've made public on the channel, and it got decent responses. It got as many views as some of my lesser viewed uploads or clips, which was surprising, and a lot of people commented on it. So anyway, this is the game where I used a really fun framing device, and apparently it is the Sweet Pea Systems favorite video.
Real rock stars don't chase the spotlight. It chases them.
You like games? I've been known to enjoy some games of chance in my time. Let's talk about gambling and odds of winning. We'll start small. Consider the basic coin flip. Simple, elegant, no frills. Assuming a properly weighted coin, you have a 50-50 chance of correctly guessing the outcome of a coin flip. Heads or tails is all you need to know. It's a game of chance that toddlers could play. Now let's complicate things. Assume you are playing craps with standard Vegas rules. Craps seems complicated, but it's actually pretty simple.
Essentially, you are placing a bet against one or more of a variety of different outcomes of a roll of 2 six-sided die. One of the most common, simple, and favorable bets is the pass line bet. To do this, you place your wager on the pass line, and then you roll the dice. If you get a 7 or an 11, then you instantly win, and your money is doubled. If you get a 4, 6, 8, 9, or 10, then whatever number you rolled becomes the point. You then have to continue rolling the dice until you hit that number again before you roll a 7. If you, the shooter, succeed, your money is doubled. If you roll a 7 before you hit the point, you lose. If you hit 2, 3, or 12, this is called craps, and you lose. Those basically exist for house advantage. This bet has the highest probability of winning at the craps table, with a 22% chance of the shooter either rolling a 7 or 11 before hitting the point before they 7 out or crap out. But maybe you like a different game. Maybe you like to play cards. So let's play some blackjack. In this game, you're trying to get the higher score of cards without going over 21 while going against the house. Number cards are worth their shown value, face cards are worth 10, and aces are worth 1 or 11. At the start of the round, you are dealt 2 cards. Then on your turn, you have the opportunity to request additional cards, or hit, in an attempt to increase your score without going over 21. There are some odd things like doubling down and splitting, but we're going to keep it simple. If your 2 cards are already 21, then you have a blackjack, and you automatically win a payout, assuming the dealer didn't open with 21 as well. The dealer wins all ties. More of that house advantage. Now, most casinos play with between 6 or 8 52-card decks with the jokers removed. So let's say that you are playing a game dealt from 6 shuffled decks. Assuming typical casino rules where the dealer has strict guidelines on when they can hit or stay, the odds of winning a payout are at roughly 42%. But maybe gambling isn't your thing. Maybe you prefer to wager war over pen and paper and partake in tabletop RPGs. The most popular tabletop RPG and the one that I play is Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. There are whole channels devoted to explaining the complex rules of this game, but I'll use a simple mechanic for demonstration purposes. When engaged in combat, many of the attacks you can attempt require a roll to hit. Basically, you are rolling a 20-sided die, or D20, in order to determine if you are successful in your attempt to attack. The nifty part is that if your D20 lands on a 20, your attack roll is automatically successful, and you now get to attack with critical damage. Your chances of rolling a natural 20 or nat 20 are 1 in 20 or 5%. Points to whoever can guess how many takes it took me to roll a 20.
Games are fun, aren't they? But what if you want the ultimate challenge? What if you want to play a game with an even smaller chance at winning than any of the games I previously mentioned? What if you want to play a game with the most brutal odds and the highest stakes? A game that could shape your fate. A game where winning can mean luxury, safety, and security. A game where losing could potentially mean death. Today we're going to talk about the game with the worst odds of them all. Today we are going to talk about succeeding under capitalism.
Cool track!
The truth is, under our current system, you have a roughly 4% chance of escaping poverty in your lifetime. That's if you're born poor. That is because we play a funny game in this country. The game is called neoliberal capitalism. And I gotta say, how we engage with it as a concept, how we characterize the gameplay, has always perplexed me. It's not that I don't understand the victory conditions. If you were to open up the instruction book and check the ways to win section, it's pretty clear that there is only one way to win the game. Be lucky. Seriously, be lucky. That's it. That's the only way to achieve the victory condition. As I said in the intro, I am talking about gambling. We're playing a game here, after all. People try to reframe the luck element into a lot of different tangibles, but ultimately it boils down to being lucky. When experts tell you that it is important to get an education, they really mean that you need to be lucky enough to have the means to afford higher education, have the right set of cognitive abilities to succeed in our outdated academic model, and know the right people going into it. A little while back,
An investigation made headlines when it exposed the phenomenon of wealthy parents who were essentially gaming the system and giving out payola to get their terrible children accepted into top universities. Also, I use the term phenomenon with heavy air quotes because really any poor college student with 2 functioning eyes already knows that the wealthy are on a completely different playing field. This is common knowledge. When they tell you to make smart investments, they're really saying that you need to be lucky enough to already have some form of capital to invest, be it loans from family and friends, or maybe a living arrangement that allows you to accrue wealth while minimizing your own cost of living. When they say don't have children out of wedlock, they really mean to be lucky enough to never have an unplanned pregnancy, lucky enough to never be raped, lucky enough to have access to family planning and birth control, lucky enough to not experience a divorce or death of a partner. But, of course, you can be really lucky. You might just hit the life jackpot. Roll a nat 20 on existence. Draw a king and an ace on your delivery day. Yep, I'm talking about being born wealthy. Those born into wealth have a 91% chance of remaining wealthy for their lifetime. Those are great odds. So just, make sure you're rolling hot while you're in the womb. When we refer to something as a game, that implies that there is a way to win. But this also means that there is a way to lose. And as with most games, it is far easier to lose than it is to win at capitalism. The win condition is luck. For an outcome to be considered lucky, it means that the odds were stacked against that outcome. And this is very true with capitalism. Luck may be the one winning condition, but unlike most games, there are a variety of losing conditions. You could become chronically ill in your 30s and wipe out whatever savings you had with medical bills. You could be supporting your family working in construction, then break your leg in a car accident and no longer be able to work the only vocation you have any training in. You could succumb to a mental health disorder during your junior year in college and have to drop out with tens of thousands in student loan debt and no degree to show for it. You could be a victim of systemic racism. You could be a victim of systemic sexism. You could be a victim of systemic ableism. The primary income earner in your household could experience any of the above. Your home could burn to the ground in a wildfire. Your home could be washed out to sea by a hurricane or flood. Your home could be blown away by a tornado. Your home could be reduced to rubble by an earthquake. You could experience a divorce where one partner doesn't have an income. You could be saddled with debilitating physical injury and crippling PTSD after being conned into enlisting in the armed forces with the promise of future financial solvency and being attacked on the soil of a foreign country that you're illegally occupying. You could get laid off during a mishandled pandemic. You could then get evicted during said pandemic. This is just a short list, by the way, far from exhaustive. There's a whole lot more I can't even get into. But that's a lot of nat ones, don't you think? There are so many ways to go bust with every hand that life deals you under capitalism. It is clear that being born into capitalism is the biggest gamble known to man. Thing is, though, the people who perpetuate this system know this. They are very aware that it isn't really possible for the majority of the population to ever be successful under the current system. They know it, and they rely on it. The primary tool in military recruitment is the opportunity to have one's college education subsidized. How successful would their recruitment campaigns be if college education was provided tuition-free at taxpayer expense, like a public good comparable to the K-12 public school system? Universal health care would cost corporations less than they're currently paying for private employer-sponsored plans. But that's not the reason they fight against it tooth and nail. Healthcare exists to these companies as a bargaining chip. It is something they can use to lure in applicants and something they can threaten to remove if a workplace attempts to organize. But we've been taught to defend this system. We've been conditioned to see this as the default, to keep playing the game. See it as an unchanging constant, and those in power don't want us to question this arrangement.
Those who accrue a large collection of currency don't want to engage with the idea that the rules weren't fair or that others did not get the same opportunities. So they claim that everyone had the chance to succeed. They make poverty a personal failing, at the same time ensuring that economic success is characterized as winning a competition, a race to the top. Corporations pride themselves on how competitive and cutthroat their environments are, but there is one thing that we must remember. If achieving financial solvency is a game, that means there are winners, and if there are winners, then there must be losers. But unlike playing a game at a table, when people lose in real life, the need for food, shelter, clothing, and medicine doesn't just go away. So maybe it's time we play a different game. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe.
So that was the game. That was, I think, one of my better made videos. I am happy with how it turned out to this day. I like it quite a bit. And yeah, a lot of people definitely resonated, not just with the message, but also the soundtrack, which I'll play a little bit of since it is public. It's a soundtrack that I think came out really well, doing a weird dubstep thing. Some people said it was reminiscent of music from Undertale. Another person said it felt like shit. What is that fucking game? Pathologic. I have never played Undertale, and I have never played Pathologic. I don't know. Cult hits, I know. I've never played them. So the inspiration behind that track was, I said I wanted to make dubstep, but imagine dubstep if you had it with a string quartet playing over it. So that's what I did. It was a break from a lot of the other stuff I had done. I was in a bit of a lo-fi hip-hop phase for a while. Moving on. Yeah, we got many more to get through. Okay, so. Every song. You are a font of positivity, Sweet Pea. So, I made a video about force. I think it's in the video, but, you know, trigger warnings on this when I talked about some rough stuff here. And even shared a little bit of my background in this video and the subsequent video.
Hey there. I'm going to make this quick. A lot of this I'm going to cover in a longer and more comprehensive video, but here I wanted to look at some of the logistics of what went down in Kenosha and offer my opinion. And in my professional opinion, the cops who were involved in the shooting of Jacob Blake are spineless cowards, terrible police, and unfit for duty. So, as I stated before, I'm going to go into greater detail about my background in upcoming videos, but long story short, I've worked in various forms of physical security for over 10 years. I've had to restrain combative individuals, including ones brandishing sharp objects, with my bare hands. I've been trained by ex-cops, ex-military, and federal law enforcement personnel. Oftentimes, when criticizing police brutality, there are those who
back the blue, who like to challenge you to perform the oh-so-dangerous job of police work before having the gall to pass judgment. Well, I'm here to say that I don't actually need to do that. I really don't. I don't even need to call upon my professional training, be it with firearms, conflict de-escalation, or advanced active restraint techniques. The officers involved aren't qualified to be cops. They're barely qualified to be crossing guards. See, I worked as a bouncer for 7 years, and I've ran security at the rowdiest nightclubs in my town. And those cops aren't even qualified to man the door at the friendliest clubs I've worked at. I've done everything from EDM parties to biker bars, and having dealt with burly bikers swinging whiskey bottles at me, I can say that I wouldn't even hire them to handle the spindly teenagers on Molly. And you know what? This time around, in order to make my point, I won't even dispute the account of events as laid out by the police. I know, it's cringe. But stick with me. The police and their beloved boot leather aficionados are going for the gold in mental gymnastics, trying to justify this shooting. So they say he had a knife in his hand. Fine. They say he had drugs in his system. Fine. They say that he was tasered and it failed to stop him. Fine. They say he ignored multiple commands to stop. I checked, by the way, and the penal code, and resisting arrest doesn't carry the death penalty, but fine. They say that he announced he had a gun in the car. Fine. They say that he opened the door of the car to retrieve a gun to initiate a gunfight with his young children sitting 3 feet away. Okay, fine. So their excuse for opening fire is that the three officers involved couldn't stop one person from getting to his vehicle when they suspected he had drugs in his system, resisted the taser, and announced that he was retrieving a gun. And their only course of action was to let the suspect, that they assumed to be armed and dangerous, casually walk away from them towards his car to retrieve his weapon before shooting him in the back 7 times? Cowardice. This is pure cowardice and fear. Ask anyone who's worked at a mental health facility if 3 people can safely restrain and disarm an unstable patient without shooting them. I don't need to be a cop to tell you that this situation was poorly handled, and it was poorly handled by cowards. As a former bouncer, I refuse to believe that 3 supposedly able-bodied peace officers are incapable of physically restraining one person. Knife or no knife. Split it up. One goes for the legs, the other go for the torso. For God's sake, he had his back turned. Haven't you ever played tackle football? It's a blindside tackle. Lower your level, wrap around the waist, and drive through the hips. Easy. Oh, by the way, do you know who else has to physically restrain combative individuals armed with sharp objects and they don't have the option of using a firearm? Federal prison guards. Seriously, guards stationed inside of the facilities on patrol don't carry firearms. They have to handle their business with pepper spray and numbers, because it is too dangerous for them to bring live ammunition into that environment. Heck, forget the adults. What would they do if they were in an elementary school and a child was running with scissors? Teachers aren't allowed to shoot their students, and they have to deal with this all of the time. But, history has shown that the police are not hesitant to visit brutality upon children, even if it's just to win a fight. Now that I've finished my thought experiment, I don't believe that Jacob should have even been stopped, as he hadn't committed a crime. Also, the prison system in America is a cruel and inhumane institution, and prison guards often perform heinous acts of brutality on inmates with little to no recourse. Again, I'll say it. Cowardice. There's a sick fear of some hidden black strength that positively frightens cops. They've dehumanized the black man in their mind to the point where he no longer qualifies as a person, but as a cornered animal with some superhuman capacity for violence. They also project this default malice onto every black suspect.
They assumed that a man who didn't want to be arrested and tasered by the police for the crime of taking a nap in a parking lot was an immediate threat to society. He ran away from police, carrying the taser that they had attempted to assault him with, and the police, fearing some nebulous future great violence that he would commit, had all the justification they needed to shoot him in the back, killing him. I am a large man. I'm 6'6", and I clock in well over 300 pounds. I am larger than the majority of adult men. Growing up, the unfortunate truth is my parents had to hammer in me the importance of being civil in all public settings, no matter what, no matter who's at fault, never raise my voice, never become visibly agitated, never sound off out of emotion, because being large, black, and loud in public is a good way to bring the full force of law enforcement down on my shoulders. I've never had the luxury of a public mental health crisis, and please understand, I don't say this to be ableist. I say this to point out that black men who struggle with mental illness do not get care, they do not get crisis lines, and they do not get mental health response teams. They get a cage or a coffin. The unwritten expectation of our society is that I have to maintain model civility, suppress my masculinity, and never show aggression. All the while white men absolutely lose their minds and go on testosterone-fueled freakouts on the regular. So Jacob Blake, father of 3, was paralyzed because 3 yellow-bellied officers couldn't follow their training. And make no mistake, this wasn't a failure of the training. Every police officer in this country is taught how to restrain non-compliant suspects. But if they are never, ever held accountable, they have no reason to bother and will take the easier route of using lethal force every time. Thank you for watching.
So, that was that actually came out shortly after the incident with Jacob Blake, and I wanted to make a longer video on a lot of the things that won't work in terms of police reform, but I wanted to get that out and talk to people. Overall, good video, I'd say. At that point, I was getting a little bit better at figuring out the best way to make use of my recording environment, so to speak, for those who are still with us. Those who are still with us, thanks for joining me. Let's continue. Let's continue. Moving right along here. Jesus, this is a long one. Oh, God. Yeah, it's an ugly topic, but if you talk to people who have experienced mental health breakdowns or people who've been institutionalized, there's definitely a disparity. It was to the point where I made a public call to all of my friends who lived nearby, including my domestic partner, and I told everybody, if I ever succumb to something like that and I am a danger to myself or others, do not call the police. Do not call the police, because I won't live to get treatment if the police show up. They will be ill-equipped to respond to a massive black man in the grips of a mental health episode. So I told him, call my friends and tell them to dogpile on me or something so that I can survive to get treatment, because my friends at least are strong enough to restrain me. But do not ever call the cops. Call my friends till an ambulance can get there, and turn away any police cruisers. It's sad, but it's the truth. It's what I've told people. All right. This one is a long one. This one was the longer video I had said called What Won't Work. Basically, because I had heard, as we got into a lot more discourse about police reform, and I'm not a reformist, I'm an abolitionist, but there are people who are well-meaning and want to talk about police reform. I wanted to make a video and kind of just make something that you could spread around and say, hey, some of that stuff you're proposing won't work. So I titled it What Won't Work.
Hey there. I'd like to do more lighthearted content at some point. I considered myself a gamer, even if I kinda suck at most games. I'd like to find some slightly less grisly political topics to discuss in a more whimsical manner. It would be nice if I could have the opportunity to make more jokes, perhaps do some deep dives into representation in video games, or talk about inclusivity in the comic books or the movies or something. I came into this with big plans to ultimately make videos about my dogs and tabletop RPGs and cooking and cigars and my taste in bourbon. Have you tried Jim Beam Devil's Cut, by the way? It's excellent. But of course, in the decade that has passed, in the 3 months that have passed since I started this channel, some less than pleasant societal issues have taken priority. Alas, this is the timeline we occupy, and I cannot bring myself to talk about mundane things in my scripted videos while there is so much work to be done. So, at time of writing, it has been a little more than 3 months since the video of the death of George Floyd ignited an international uprising and amplified calls to address police brutality and systemic racism. Did you know that in that time, there have been 262 fatal police shootings in this country? Seriously, in a 3-month period, while under protest and heavy scrutiny, American cops just cannot help but execute members of the population at an alarming rate. Come on, guys. This is a capitalist country. We're supposed to die of a mishandled pandemic or of preventable illness because we can't afford health care, or in a corporate carbon emission-fueled environmental catastrophe, or, by our own hand in a society that doesn't prioritize mental health. The good news is that there is a conversation going on. There's a conversation going on about solutions. And while I am all for abolition of the police and I openly advocate for it, the sad reality is that our elected officials on both sides of the aisle don't seem too keen on unseating that power structure just yet. So it seems like defunding and reform will be an unavoidable first step in the journey to a post-police world. As is expected with conversations like these, I've seen a number of suggestions, albeit well-meaning, but not very well thought out. So grab your shopping cart and your mask, and we'll maintain 6 feet social distance whilst we enter the marketplace of ideas and discuss the police problem, and while we're shopping, discard the ideas that won't work. As I said earlier, a lot of these suggestions come from very well-meaning people, allies in the movement who are just as desperate to see systemic change. So I don't think that some of the bad suggestions come from malice so much as a lack of knowledge. I should also state that what I am putting forward here are my opinions. I feel informed in my opinions due to my background and previous interactions, but I could very well be wrong. This is going to be a long process, and mistakes will be made along the way. But getting out of our current system of policing in America has to take top priority, so we can't be afraid to take bold steps. A bit of my background. I'm a security professional. At one point, I was even actively pursuing a career in law enforcement or corrections. Yes, I know, I have a very dark past. Maybe I'll make a video about it, who knows. Anyway, at one point, I'd made it pretty far into the selection process for a county law enforcement agency before I encountered some, we'll say, systemic barriers to entry that kinda ended that process and disillusioned me to the entire industry as a whole. Even then, I've worked a number of physical security jobs at varying levels, including being a bouncer at nightclubs, to executive protection, senatorial details, and VIP escorts, as well as bodyguard work, and I've done this for over a decade. In the state where I lived, you had to attend a class to become certified to work as an armed security officer. I attended this class, which was taught by a retired federal law enforcement officer and a former trainer for the cops. I watched all of the same videos that the police in the academy watch. I've been taught by police lieutenants on filing reports and use of force and gathering evidence and conducting investigations. While I was in the process of selection for a law enforcement position, I even took it upon myself during my own time to dig up additional training materials utilized by the local police with regards to things like use of force and apprehension of suspects. To this day, I work very closely with law enforcement, for my job, and being rather nosy, I usually take the opportunity to casually pick the brains of the cops who come to my place of employment whenever I can. All of this is to say that while I've never found work in law enforcement, I have a solid working knowledge of the basics of how police agencies operate, and I interact with cops on an almost daily basis. While there are people out there who prefer their boot leather with a bottle of A1 sauce, who will then use this to immediately dismiss any opinions I have on the subject, I feel that I can offer some insight and nuanced takes on the given topic. So this takes me to my first point. A lot of the conversation on police reform is centered around training. This takes many forms. Some people will comment on the short number of hours that are required in some jurisdictions for the police to gain certification as peace officers. Others will suggest mandatory mental health and de-escalation training. I feel that that's all well and good, but training isn't the problem. Seriously, training isn't where we need to focus our energy right now. Obviously, extremely problematic elements like warrior training should be removed, and I think that most industries across the board could use training in racial bias at the hiring level. But here's the thing to remember. Cops are already trained. No, really, hear me out. Eric Garner was killed because a cop used a restraint technique that was already banned from their department. 2 different cops have been killed in Texas when they performed no-knock raids on the wrong person or wrong house and also didn't announce that they were police. It is part of their training and has even been established at the federal level before that once contact has been made with a suspect, they must announce their presence. How else will you know that the good guys are coming to kick down your door and shoot down your dog as opposed to some 2-bit home invader? Recently, a man named Jacob Blake was shot 7 times in the back by Kenosha, Washington police after breaking up an altercation and attempting to walk away from police officers and get into his van. A van that held his children, by the way. Thing is, cops are already totally taught how to apprehend an escaping subject. Physical restraint techniques and verbal instructions have been part of just about every police academy curriculum for decades. If you have 3 officers and 1 suspect that's non-compliant, you absolutely do not need bullets or tasers or chokeholds to immobilize them. Trust me, I've worked in enough rowdy nightclubs and I've restrained countless people, even while they brandished knives or broken beer bottles or chair legs. And I didn't even get to use handcuffs. Usually all I had was a flashlight. The only reason that they would be so comfortable, so easy and ready to escalate the situation to deadly force is because they know that their actions will be justified and they won't be held accountable. But I am tipping my hand a bit. Trust me, we will get to that later. We've seen police draw firearms on a vehicle with children in it over a stolen doll. The video shows a terrified family sitting in their car as cops point loaded weapons at them. This is another failure to adhere to training. There exists a concept in the tactical world known as time, distance, opportunity. Time, distance, and opportunity. This is the philosophy that police are taught to utilize when going into a potentially dangerous situation. So, looking at time, when you arrive on the scene, you take time to assess the situation and gather as many details as you can before making your next move. This ensures that the right steps are taken. Distance. If the situation is rapidly evolving, or you don't have all of the details, you maintain a safe distance until you've had the time to assess the situation and the environment. Opportunity. Now that you...
So, I'm not going to watch this entire thing, but it is a good primer on a lot of some of the different elements of police training. But, in this one, I go over some of the arguments I saw. A big one that I hear is they talk about education. They talk about how police in other countries, have to have a collegiate level degree before they can serve. And, I mentioned how every police officer I've ever met has a bachelor's degree. Most of them major in criminal justice. Not really a solution. And, they talk about having more black or more minority cops, and that's not really a solution either. So, all in all, I think the video is good. The music was a bit loud on this one. We're going to move on. Thank you for the kind words, Donnie Donaway, and the fine Sweet Pea system. I appreciate it. I really do. All right, let's see. So, I made a video called We've Been Here Before. Don't need to launch into all of... I'm going to skip that one, but for the most part, we've been here before, mostly talked about how we've constantly been fighting against a lot of elements of neoliberal politics. I go into detail about the Patco strike, and Reagan's union busting, and how it dealt a fatal blow to a lot of unions back in the 80s. Fun trivia fact, I shot this video. This is the only scripted video that I shot on my phone. So it does have a lot smoother video. My phone camera was actually the highest quality camera in my house at that time. So you can see it moves a lot smoother. Just a bit of fun trivia for you. I'm trying to remember what the song was for this one.
I play games, work on music, and give the occasion.
Oh, yeah. That was the first song I ever made on stream, by the way. That was a little synthwave track that I actually did during a live stream. All in all, decent video. A bit of a downer, though. Some streamers were nice enough to sort of share and pass the content around and share it on their stream. And when they did, they're like, oh, this is a downer. Yikes. I did make a follow-up to Tired, and we are going to watch that one. This one is still Tired, because there were some arguments that I had left out.
Oh, would you look at that? Propane and propane accessories are on sale. And the local butcher has some A5 Wagyu in stock. Oh man, this is going to be a great relaxing day. Got my supplies, got my bourbon, my cigars, my dog. I'm just going to be able to sit back all day and...
has owned slaves.
Oh God, no. No, not again. Not again. I already did this. My subscribers are gonna think I'm not creative. Please, I'm so tired. I just want to grill.
Nobody alive has owned slaves.
Correct you are. You made a basic observation in a bad faith attempt to end the discussion. Nobody alive in the United States has owned slaves, not counting the very real slave labor taking place in for-profit prisons across the country that is literally codified in the 13th Amendment. But here's the thing. You are rebutting an argument that nobody is making. The argument isn't that there are still slave owners who must get their comeuppance. It's more like, even though chattel slavery ended, the effects of it on generational wealth, educational opportunities, and public perception of the black...
This was a gaffe, a screw up on my part. I used the wrong graphic in this part, and I really, really, really despise re-uploading. And in this case, I would have had to re-edit and re-render the whole flippin' thing, so I put the wrong graphic here.
Black community hasn't.
Slavery ended years ago.
Man, you're a dense one. Won't give it up, huh? Well, accepting the fact that the 400 years of chattel slavery did in fact end in the 1800s, this was followed up by Jim Crow. Jim Crow existed until the civil rights movement in the 1960s, which both of my still living parents were alive for and vividly recall. MLK went to Morehouse College in 1944, which at the time was the only college on the planet for black men. This isn't some ancient history.
Do you believe that a massive societal ill like systemic racism would just vanish in 2 generations without serious and focused efforts at the institutional level?
Why should I be punished?
Yeah, kind of saw that one coming. It almost inevitably pops up in the reparations discussion. Here's the thing. Have you ever asked yourself why you feel that your tax dollar is going to help a sizable portion of the population who's suffering as a form of punishment? Like, do you think paying for a fire department is punishment? You've already said that you aren't responsible for systemic racism. What do you think this is punishment for? This framing of punishment suggests that you see taxation as a form of punishment when it is in fact the cost of a civilization. Why is it that whenever it comes to helping people who need it most, we suddenly need to tighten the purse strings, but the government has no problem signing on to defense bills in the hundreds of billions of dollars or sending trillions of dollars to prop up Wall Street after its latest tumble? This keeps capitalism on life support for yet another generation. But this characterization of social safety nets and reparations stems from a mixture of intellectual dishonesty and an appeal to emotion. It's poisoning the discourse and is easily rebutted.
Rioting never solves anything.
Rioting founded this country. Quite literally. The Boston Massacre was the then equivalent of a widely publicized act of police brutality, except that then it was at the hands of British soldiers. The resulting Boston Tea Party was a mass destruction of property meant to send a message to the wealthy ruling elite. This was a riot that escalated to a full-on war, which we won. Rioting gets attention. That's kind of the point. I am very suspect of someone suggesting that protests have to remain peaceful, even in the face of consistently documented brutality at the hands of law enforcement. The implication being that the onus is on a marginalized people to maintain civility, repress their anger and emotions, and continue to use methods that don't make the white moderates uncomfortable, all the while continuing to be dehumanized at the hands of the state with little to no accountability. You say violence is never the answer. I say maybe for you. But when we had professional athletes peacefully demonstrate, you told them to shut up and play. When actors and entertainers expressed their solidarity, you told them to sit down and stay in their lane. When we marched, you made up curfews out of thin air and then gassed us because you've got it in your head that city ordinances trump constitutional rights. So tell me, what is the answer? What will get your attention? What will change your mind? Change the system. What form of protest do you deem socially acceptable that won't be ignored? If violence isn't the answer, also, tell the cops to knock it off.
BLM, Antifa are terrorists.
Well, this betrays a certain level of willful ignorance on current issues. Antifa is not a group or organization. Antifa is not something you are or something you belong to. It is something you do. There is no membership, dues, or leadership. Any organization is extremely loose and decentralized by design. There is no defining ideology beyond confronting fascism and taking direct action against it where it exists to stop it. There is a diversity of political beliefs among those practicing anti-fascist action, and it takes many forms. Some anti-fascist action may be to mask up and take to the streets for 100 straight days of protest, of extrajudicial slaughter at the hands of the state. It could also include reconnaissance, infiltration, and surveillance. It can also be as simple as providing support to those on the front lines in the form of food, shelter, and medical aid. There may be some acts of property damage or physical violence as Antifa, but it serves to strike against a fascist power structure. But remember that in order to be acts of terrorism, they have to be centered around a political or religious ideology. And as I stated earlier, Antifa doesn't involve a specific ideology beyond stopping fascism. If the idea of preventing fascism strikes fear and terror into your heart, you should consider what side you're on. BLM, or Black Lives Matter, is a decentralized civil rights movement that has founders and loosely organized groups, but largely exists as a social justice movement, independent of specific ideologies. By calling them terrorists, you are suggesting that they are attempting to push a specific ideological goal through acts of violence. So what is this terrifying idea that they are trying to force on the American people? Oh wait, they just want black people's lives to matter equally. Seems odd to use the same politically charged language to describe them that we use for white supremacists who shoot up synagogues and churches, or the violent religious extremists who bomb civilians. Let's rethink this framing.
The Bachelorette is back. Stream it live on ABC with YouTube TV.
Ads.
You're burning down your own communities.
This shows the source of your logic. If this is your argument, which is inaccurate, but I'll get to that, then you have made it clear that you are, to a certain degree, driven by greed and warped priorities. To hold this stance, you must value your property over the lives of others. I understand if you do. The religious adherence to property rights is a core tenet of neoliberal capitalism, and multiple generations have been thoroughly indoctrinated in it. And you are wrong. Here's the thing. Out of the hundreds of verifiably peaceful protests, some insured buildings and businesses have been damaged or destroyed. Some of them by white supremacist agitators, some of them by demonstrators. But if you do a little digging, you'll see that in most of these situations, it's not really a loss to the black community in these areas. And the sad truth is because most of the black communities in major cities across the country own very little of the businesses or property in their community. Going back all the way from Black Wall Street in Tulsa, to MOVE in Philadelphia, to the interstate highway systems, to redlining, to the mismanagement of the Freedmen's Bank, to outright housing discrimination, black wealth tends to be hard to come by, even in communities largely populated by black residents. For generations, black Americans have been literally blocked from attaining generational wealth in the form of buying land or property, to the point where the median net worth for a black resident in Boston is $8 compared to $170,000 for a white resident. A dollar spent in a black neighborhood tends to leave that neighborhood in a matter of hours, if not minutes. Money funnels out of black neighborhoods and residents and fills the pockets of white investors and corporations. So I ask you, how much should a black neighborhood care about protecting the exploitative systems in their own backyards when they have no say in the financial opportunities afforded to them and have been historically blocked from amassing any form of their own generational wealth? So when I see a big box retail store in a black community not serving it, but instead siphoning off its wealth to some corporate trust, or a used car lot extorting the community with predatory loans getting set on fire, I don't mourn the loss of brick and mortar. I understand. I understand using whatever means are left at one's disposal to strike back at the symbols of oppression in a community. And this does apply to statues as well.
There are no racist laws.
While it may be tempting to see this as an innocent mistake, this argument is one of the more insidious and malicious ways that they will try to shut down the conversation or in the argument. They'll say, "Show me a racist law," implying that there needs to be a racist law for racism, even systemic racism, to still exist. Another fun trivia fact. I actually ad-libbed this part. When I was writing the script, I got writer's block on the racist laws segment of the tired argument, and I never fixed it, and so it was literally empty. So this whole part I ad-libbed. This shows a willful misunderstanding of the difference between de jure and de facto. De jure institutional racism comes from a place of racist laws, i.e. Jim Crow, the Three-Fifths Compromise. However, de facto racism is racism that comes about as an effect of non-racist laws, essentially is functionally a racist system. So you can have things like mandatory minimums, stop and frisk, broken windows policing. These things are not drafted and documented to be specifically racist. However, nonetheless, the effect is that blacks will be impacted disproportionately by these elements. These arguments leave me tired and stressed. They aren't even that difficult to rebut. They don't exist to foster conversation or seek out explanation on tricky topics. Know that when you see someone using these arguments, their whole purpose is to shut down the conversation entirely, defeat you in a war of attrition by making sure that you have been worn down by too much fatigue to continue fighting. But if you are able to, don't give them the satisfaction. Never give ground. Never let them go unchallenged. I am tired but not done fighting, broken but unbowed, and I'm going to keep fighting with you. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, now, Sweet Pea, EJ does a great job, even unscripted. Have had a lot of fun in the past chatting with EJ. I was actually on an episode of The Dialectic recently, and that was a lot of fun. Moving on. All right, let's see what we got here. All right. So this, I guess I can't skip this one. This is a video I made called LARP This was a Halloween video, so I was in character. And it was me exploring how we use the term LARP and why maybe we should rethink that, and covers a couple other pet peeves of mine that people in online discourse kind of trip over, some areas where they might be making inaccurate statements.
Kind frozen treat bars. Creamy, delicious, and plant-based. Find them in the freezer aisle.
This Friday.
Are you okay?
Just getting started.
Disney's Jungle Cruise, rated PG-13.
Imhotep. Horus here. Today we're going to explore aesthetics, their cultural significance, and some common criticisms. As a divine sky god, much of my time is spent observing you mortals and your curious rituals. So much energy and conflict is centered around competing ideologies, and wherever you find ideologies, you will find aesthetics. Be it religion, economic theory, or sociology, every political movement is accompanied by evocative aesthetics. These can be visual cues, dialectical notes, and slang and symbology. The affectations of different political and social movements will always have corresponding cultural expressions. And just as the members of socio-political movements will often be at odds with other movements, cultural aesthetics are often held under scrutiny by similar or rival cultures. The actions of fanatic mortals make for such intriguing study. So let's look at some forms of cultural aesthetics that have grown up around socio-political movements and their significance in the enlightened world. There is a term that has become common parlance, and I find it rather intriguing. LARP, an acronym for live-action roleplay. LARP's original meaning literally referred to fantasy tabletop game fanatics donning costume and assuming characters, as well as, roles, to physically act out stories and scenarios in real time. It is a largely social activity and at its core innocent enough. LARP is a fairly neutral term that didn't evolve to have much connotation beyond the implied virginal status of its practitioners. But as is customary with language, terminology evolves. Right now, we see the term being wielded as a pejorative against persons or groups that we deem to be presenting exaggerated aesthetics tied to a culture or ideology. Anglo men with beards, tactical vests, and openly displayed firearms are often said to be LARPing, in this case, playing soldier. Hardcore fanatics of regimes in post-Tsarist Russia are often affecting ushankas, hammers, and sickles, and excessive amounts of red in their efforts to visually represent their political ideology. These individuals are often also said to be LARPing. I've seen the term applied to those who enjoy the trappings of Kemet, but I obviously wouldn't know anything about that. One troubling thing that I see from a lot of people who weaponize this term against others is an implied insincerity, be it right-wing demonstrators strapped with weaponry, anime profile avatars wearing Soviet military garb, or fascists wearing khakis and performing Roman salutes. We are led to assume that the person branded with this title are merely performing. They are but actors, immersing themselves in the trappings loosely associated with their ideology merely because they like the way it appears. However, I am suggesting that maybe every person who LARPs isn't necessarily insincere in their beliefs, and in fact their beliefs may very well align with the appearance. I also believe that every cultural aesthetic isn't necessarily what we would consider LARPing in this context. Now, I stated earlier that LARP is a neutral term that has gained new connotations, but it should be known that we can't always divorce the performative roleplay aspect from the ideological. Many powerful entities and political movements throughout history were, at least in part, inspired by an aesthetic fantasy. Look no further than the visual political propaganda during the First and Second World War. Every nation involved had their vision of the role and aesthetic of their ideal patriot. Some groups wanted to portray their citizenry as stoic, capable laborers grinding away at the mills and granaries to fuel the war effort. Others may have focused on hygiene, grooming, or economic mobility. But it goes even deeper than that. It is common knowledge that Hitler was invested in an ahistorical view of the genetic makeup of early humans.
He carried a distorted view of the importance of phenotypical traits common among people of a certain geographic region, and the world that he envisioned was one where everyone played the same role, specifically the role of a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, physically superior, intellectually powerful superhuman or Übermensch. He called them Aryans, and despite the fact that the original usage of the term Aryan referred to people of Indo-Iranian and South Asian descent, his scholars believe that Aryans were some master race of Nordic globe-trotting conquerors who established every major civilization before being lost to race mixing. You will find a pattern of historical illiteracy and fantastical nonsense amongst these groups, something they have in common with RPG LARPers, I suppose, with a modicum of murderous intent sprinkled in. Sadly, you see the history of fantasy and roleplay rise and origins of many white supremacist groups in the United States. An increasing number of mothers would find themselves widows after their working-class husbands died untimely deaths. This left them with a family to raise, no education, and little to no job prospects for women at the time. A group of Catholic men banded together to form a nonprofit support network to provide food, housing, and living costs to these families. This organization wanted a notable Catholic male figure to be the face of their movement, so they called themselves the Knights of Columbus, referencing the medieval warriors of honor and heroism of European lore, and Columbus, some unremarkable Genoese colonizer. To this day, they have ceremonies where they wear anachronistic outfits and medieval weaponry. The Freemasons are a social club dating back to the 1400s, named after masonry guilds that regulated the certification and trade of masons or people who craft stone structures. Even now, this organization prides itself on secrecy amongst its members and allows a whole host of conspiracy theories to arise about its inner workings. They use terminology like journeyman and artisan to rank their members and center all of their operations around a grand lodge, despite the fact that the majority of their members are most certainly not stonecutters. They definitely seem to enjoy LARPing as if they are some ancient order of master craftsmen, down to their love of symbology and garish costumes. It should be noted that some people attempt to link them to the laborers of Kemet, and let me be the one to say, officially, do not associate me with these clowns. Going back to angry white Caucasians, the KKK, or Ku Klux Klan, are an order of white supremacists that had 3 distinct iterations since the end of the Civil War. The name was most likely derived from the Greek term kuklos, which means circle. They probably took this from the Kuklos Adelphon, a collegiate Greek society, which is a laughable form of LARP that I won't be getting into. Essentially, a group of LARPers and fantasy lovers who were mad that black people were now citizens took it upon themselves to perform voter intimidation, workplace discrimination, and good old-fashioned murder. But when you look at the organizational hierarchy, which at one point went by the name Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, you see titles like Wizard, Grand Dragon. They often envision themselves as ghosts of the Confederacy or mystical riders as they rode through the night, wearing white robes and hoods to commit acts of terrorism against minorities. Once again, you see a group infusing mythology and folklore into their aesthetic and inspiring their hateful ideology. There are others as well. Black Israelites see themselves as true sons and daughters of Israel. Their ceremonies are often performed with ceremonial apparel and props. Theirs is an extremist interpretation of the Torah. The Nation of Islam have assumed a radical take on the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. They can be seen wearing odd attire and practicing dated cultural traditions. Interestingly enough, there is a common greeting that has been repurposed to refer to followers of mine or those who engage in the aesthetics of Kemet. Oddly enough, this term is often used to apply to the extremist groups I mentioned earlier. This is particularly confusing to me, as I seriously doubt they would accept that title themselves. I don't see how the self-proclaimed children of Israel would adopt a title derived from Kemet. These two groups famously share a very conflicted history. I also don't understand why someone espousing the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad would be given that label either, as they were often at odds with the culture of my followers. Both of these groups speak 2 completely different languages, separate from my own entirely. Also, one cannot ignore that powerful women were often venerated in Kemet,
filling roles as warriors, queens, heads of household, and deities. Not to mention that Kemet had highly progressive views for the time toward the concepts of gender and sexuality. All of this is to say that one shouldn't assign a label used by lovers of Kemetic aesthetics to modern-day children of Israel, or followers of the Prophet, or those who base their ideology in the hatred or exclusion of others. And dare I say, many of these groups don't appreciate the label either, and if one is uncertain as to what to call a certain group, perhaps ask first. But staying silent is also an option. Do you get it? Ultimately, we have taken what was once an innocent, politically neutral acronym like LARP and given it new meaning. But isn't it a bit reductive the way we use that term? In the new life that LARP has taken on, we do away with all nuance and immediately invoke the most negative connotations, turning something that denotes cultural effects and hobbies into a derogatory term. We seek to imply insincerity on the part of the target when we say that they are LARPing. But we really cannot logically group all forms of role play together. When we go to the forum, we are all playing some type of role. Are we not? Someone placing the imported artwork from the Far East on their wall or children's figurines in the backdrop while they address an audience is playing a role. That being the role of someone who engages in similar consumption to their target fan base. Individuals of a plundered culture who seek to express the aesthetics of an ancient society that embodied elegance, posterity, intelligence, and success that may have been someone adjacent to their ancestors, well, they are playing a role too, and it goes both ways. Angry Western chauvinists obsessed with cereal grains who take to the streets to engage in brawls with progressive demonstrators are the ones who don military-style accessories and weaponry to intimidate the masses. They are playing a role too, much like a group of despondent, defeated, angry white men who met up in secret chambers to engage in weird rituals and call each other fantasy-inspired names like dragon and wizard before donning white robes to ride off and commit acts of racially inspired terrorism. They're all playing a role. So if someone decides to wear the decals of a bygone regime to match their ideology, maybe they are LARPing. But I think that we need to remember that not everyone who LARPs is insincere, and not everyone who expresses cultural aesthetics are LARPing. We are very capable of understanding this level of nuance. We can see when someone is misusing terms like, say, communist or anarchist or socialist, and I think it would not be too much energy to apply that same level of nuance and subtlety and understanding to a subject like LARP. At the end of the day, all that really matters is what role do you play?
To answer your question, Sweet Pea, it's it's a pretty simple note progression. It was just, I did a lot of randomized chops to it to give it a real noise feel. I fell into this track I was working on, and it made this really fun little noise electro thing that I pulled together kind of by accident. But it actually worked for Halloween theme. That was my actual Halloween costume. That was the first time I wore my battle vest. So where does that leave us? That leaves us with the the precursor to one of my better videos and my first unscripted video. So I made a brief video that I won't play all of it. It was called Let's Chat because I was openly admitting I had no ideas for a video. So I had made some community posts and people had shared some things that they thought I should talk about. And so that's what I did in this video.
So I have a problem. I wrote a script for a video of decent length way back before election night that captured most of my ideas at the time regarding the upcoming election and my views on the concept of presidents as a whole. And while I still stand behind most of those ideas, I never felt comfortable with the rhetoric I was using given the atmosphere leading up to the election.
Election night has now come and gone, and a lot of the wording is out of date, and my stance on the topic has shifted slightly on some elements. Mind you, I still view voting every 4 years as doing the bare minimum for participating in a democracy, much like brushing your teeth is doing the bare minimum for daily self-care. But I also feel that much more nuance could be applied to a topic like the executive branch more than just saying thing bad. Despite being the bare minimum in an election with terrible choices, I do still believe that there is a right and wrong candidate. But regardless of who you voted for or if you voted, I still want to continue to speak on topics that I feel need our attention. I don't consider this a theory channel, as I find leftists quote theory at each other the way Christians used to quote scripture at me, and I have little use for either. I don't need scripture to be a good person, and I don't need theory to do direct action. I like to consider myself agitprop, even if that's being a little generous with my level of influence. That said, as I mentioned earlier, writer's block can be rough, so I figured I'd see what content I could farm from my loyal subscribers. So let's get started. Skyline or Gold Star? Well, right out of the gate with something that will alienate non-Cincinnatians watching. Okay. First of all, Blue Ash Chili is the best, but if I had to pick one of the two mentioned, Gold Star, for sure. Skyline is terrible. I want chili, not burger soup. For those who don't know, Skyline and Gold Star are two popular chili drive-through chains located in the greater Cincinnati area, also known as the Tri-State, which is composed of the corners of Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. Cincinnati chili, which is sometimes referred to as Greek chili, is a type of meaty chili that was first developed by Greek immigrants in the city of Cincinnati. It quickly became a local staple. It is also almost non-existent outside of the Tri-State. Most people from out of town who talk about chili are usually referring to Tex-Mex chili or chili con carne, which is more appropriate in the American Southwest. That being said, here in Cincinnati, they sell cans of the stuff in the grocery store, and you can buy frozen meals of it in the freezer section. There are two signature dishes, the first consisting of the humble cheese coney, a hot dog covered in chili with shredded cheese on top. Mustard and raw onions are optional. The other is the three-way. Stop laughing. The three-way is a bowl of spaghetti noodles covered in chili and then topped with shredded cheese, often served with oyster crackers on the side. Hot sauce recommended but not mandatory. Skyline and Gold Star are the two biggest chili chains in town, with over 200 locations between them. You know, actor and friend of the channel, Mark Borson, has made a great video exploring the conspiracy theory behind how two competing chili chains never seem to gain a foothold over the other while existing in the same region, oftentimes mere blocks from each other. You should check it out, and he is a great comedian with lots of funny content on his channels. Like many regional dishes, I find that people either love it or are already gagging at the thought of chili on spaghetti noodles. But I'd say just give it a try. Alright, cool, that was an easy one. Next, the value of militancy. I think that militancy in the modern age is of utmost value. Here's why. There will be another Trump. I don't speak in terms of if, but when. And rest assured, the next conservative ringer will be much more palatable and much more competent, which makes it all the more important to organize and be militant in that organization. We have to remember what we're up against. Groups like the 3%ers have made themselves known. They have a number of war veterans in their ranks and are known for owning a lot of firearms that they are trained to use. The white militias, who are hoarding firearms, are the same ones who are pushing for a civil war so that they can drop the pretense and indiscriminately kill minorities. That being said, it's important that all militant movements on the left are cognizant of what direct action they take and what the repercussions are. At this time, I do not believe that any leftist movement should be advocating for a hot war without a firm understanding of what that entails. As a leftist, I may desire to fight fascist and white supremacist actors in the streets. My foe, on the other hand, wants to wantonly execute poor minorities, those with disabilities, and political rivals, regardless of threat level. I'm fine, Starlight. See leftists gunning down churches and prayer meetings. But if we
escalate to a hot war, and things do get loud, we have to expect that the first victims will be the weakest and most vulnerable. This is part of asymmetrical warfare. We go from a movement to an insurgency, and nobody comes out clean on the other side of an insurgency. Still, I think that being militant and driven to perform direct action and mutual aid is essential. We are the ones fighting the established system. So any militant movement, as long as it protects the most vulnerable and is as democratic as is possible, should be supported. Resisting complacency under Biden. You know, I think that the president-elect might deserve his own video. I don't know, we'll see. Bash Biden and Kamala. See previous response. But hey, did you know that Kamala dated Montel Williams? Isn't that like some clickbaity trash? Alright, moving on. Democrat-run cities. You know, this almost made it into one of my tired argument videos, but I felt that it was a minor talking point. Not to mention, while this may come off as a shock, I'm an anarchist. I don't like the Democratic Party. That said, there's clearly a difference in the parties, and this idea that we can blame all of the problems in society on Democrat-run cities is a weak conservative lie. And while I'd argue that subjects like crime and poverty don't necessarily follow party lines as much as other systemic issues, before I address this claim with some material analysis, I'll play along and use their framing device.
What's
the
up,
majority
Mark?
of states that take more in federal tax revenue than they generate, Republican, by a long shot. Party of fiscal responsibility, folks. States producing the least educated populace, Mississippi and West Virginia, Republican-run states. Greatest percentage of people living below the poverty line, Mississippi again. Highest infant mortality rates, Republican states, and near the top, oh come on, Mississippi again? Really? Now, again, a lot of these things are more indicative of class lines and systemic racism, but hopefully that shows you how easy it is to twist statistics to fit your narrative. Also, when they talk about crime in Democrat-run cities or just big cities in general, they're using raw numbers, which, yeah, more people, more crime. But when you scale up to use that biggest foe of the mouthy Republican per capita, you see that the crime rates in Democratic cities are about on par with similar-sized Republican areas when population is taken into account. And who knows, maybe a lot of people still choose to live in cities because they know that the Democrats running cities tend to care quite a bit more about reducing infant mortality and improving education. Summing up the last 4 years. Okay, listen, I'll make a video about Trump and Biden, and I'll make sure that it's a little longer and it's a little more detailed, and I'll try to incorporate some neat framing elements into it. There, now that I've said it in a video, it won't stop bugging me until it becomes a reality. There are some that I didn't get to, mainly because they'd make great topics for their own videos. But I want you to know.
So, excuse me. I shared that video on some subreddits, as I do, to promote the channel, as I'd always done. And well, wouldn't you know, the subreddit r/socialism banned me the day after I shared it there, which caught me by surprise because I didn't recall saying anything inflammatory or anything against their rules. They never got back to me on how I broke their rules, and I am still banned from that subreddit to this day. In retrospect, I probably wouldn't even have made a video about this, but I thought there was a point to be made against slavish adherence to dogmatism. And so I made my first unscripted video. I took my DSLR camera outside and put it on a tripod, and I wasn't going to fuss around with a teleprompter or anything like that. It was fresh on my mind. I was honestly a little butthurt about it, and so I made my first unscripted video, which got an amazing response and was one of my highest performing videos to this day. In addition to that, the Reddits where I did share that one, including r/breadtube, the post that I made about it on r/breadtube got so many comments. I just got overwhelmed with emails, comments on the video, comments on the Reddit about everybody's bad interactions and the history of our socialism and apparently all the shady stuff that has happened on that subreddit. And it just amazed me that this is such a problem. So it got so many responses on the BreadTube subreddit that they closed it to commenting, which is insane. But yeah. And this is bringing us pretty much to the end of 2020. But social media was a mistake. Yeah, possibly. Sweet Pea System. You like Cincinnati style chili? That's awesome. All right, let's watch me gripe about getting banned, but try to spin a message into it. This is the first time also that I did some lifestyle aesthetics, you know, drinking whiskey, smoking a cigar in the backyard in front of my grill. Changed it up. I think maybe the outdoor thing really caught a lot of people as well.
A funny thing happened on Reddit the other day.
So, I got banned from my first subreddit. Am I officially a dirtbag leftist now? Did I earn my street cred? Alright, so this is going to be like an unscripted thing. I didn't really write a script, so if it seems like it's off the cuff, then bear with me. Basically, the last video I made, it was entitled Let's Chat, and
it was also really cold that day, actually. That's why I was wearing a sweater. It was actually kind of cold outside.
I posted it, you know, to promote it on the r/socialism subreddit. And I'm going to stop right here and let you all know that under no circumstances are any of you to go there and mention this video. Under no circumstances are you to go and harass them or their moderator team. I have appealed the ban. I haven't heard back from them yet as of time of writing, but I don't like to facilitate leftist infighting. And but it did, however, give me an opportunity to address something that I think could be, that we could talk about more in the online discourse. So I was accused of bourgeoisie democracy apologia, neo liberal view.
I don't know why the picture of the screenshot was artifacting like that on all the things I linked in this video. Something got borked with the resolutions of the things that I dropped in on top of this video, and to this day I don't know how or why it did it.
Use lesser evilism and basically a YouTube self-promotion account. Judging by the video that I put up, and given the context of the rules that I supposedly violated, I think I'm really only guilty of one of those, the YouTube self-promotion account. And yeah, my Reddit is largely to promote my YouTube channel, but that is the one thing that's not actually listed anywhere in their rules or moderation guidelines. At least as of time of writing, and I did check pretty thoroughly. I can still view the forum, I'm just not allowed to post or comment anymore. So this, if they had watched the video in its entirety, I don't think that they would have made that assessment of my views. I did say at the beginning that while I felt that voting was the bare minimum of participation in a democracy,
I guess the line at the beginning where I said that while I believe there is a right and wrong choice, there's more that can be done. You see that part, though, where they said there's a right or wrong choice, that was probably what got them caught up.
Mind you, I still view voting every 4 years as doing the bare minimum for participating in a democracy, much like brushing your teeth is doing the bare minimum for daily self-care. But I also feel that much more nuance could be applied to a topic like the executive branch more than just saying thing bad. Despite being the bare minimum in an election with terrible choices, I do still believe that there is a right and wrong candidate.
I mean, I really wish, though, that they had watched the whole video, because at the end I literally said that no systemic change or reform is going to come from the stroke of the pen in the Oval Office. That's just not how it works, and I acknowledged that in the video.
But remember, it is never, ever going to come from a stroke of the pen in the Oval Office.
What it really boils down to is I get the impression that this is a subreddit of Bernie or Busters. When you look at the rules for the subreddit, it immediately says that any Biden supporter lesser evilism is going to warrant an instant permanent ban, but any Biden support is ignored unless obnoxious. And that right there, that is the crux of the issue. I think the quote from their rule says, "We do not acknowledge that there's a good choice between two rapists," or something like that. And I do think it's a bit delusional to pretend that both presidents are the same. But let's fine. Let's say that that's your ideology. You know, I have we're going to go through a thought experiment. Okay, if I ask you, what is socialism? Now, most of you who watch my video can immediately say, on the broad stroke, it's the democratic control over the means of production. Right. So, and if I asked you, what is anarchism? Again, you could probably broad stroke it for me and say that it is an ideology based on dissolving and dismantling unjust hierarchies and establishing a stateless and classless society. Very, very basic, you know. No gods, no masters, that sort of thing. But I need you to step outside your bubble for a second, and this is something specifically that I aim towards the people who've cocooned themselves into our socialism, is that what do you think it's like outside of that forum? Imagine for a second, we're going to do a thought experiment. Imagine for a second that you're not on our socialism. Imagine that you're at the donut shop, you're at the cigar store, you're at the liquor store, you know, you're at the coffee shop. Hell, let's go a step further. You're at a rally, right? You're talking to someone who supported Biden. You're talking to someone maybe in the South that voted for Biden over Bernie in the primaries. Right? If you approach that person and ask them, what is socialism? What is anarchism? Do you think they're going to get it right? Do you think they're going to have a good idea of it? Like, we have elected officials who don't even understand it. So this goes to my greater issue is we need to get better at talking to people where they are. That means we're going to have to talk to some people that we don't like to talk to. And that means that we are going to have to engage with some people who do see at least some merit in electoralism. Let's say you're talking to this hypothetical Biden supporter and they say, well, you know, I still think Biden is a better choice than Trump. What are you going to do? Shun them? Begone, lib. Leave from my sight. I will not hear anything you have to say anymore. Right. So, and if that's your stance, what I will ask you is, what do you think the revolution's going to look like? What do you think a dictatorship of the proletariat is going to look like? Do you think it's going to be everybody that fits your purity test of socialism and what socialist praxis is going to look like? Or maybe, just maybe, you're going to have to convince some people. That's ultimately what I want to leave you with, is that when you have these enclaves of leftist thought, and you do things like take the Bernie or bust stance, or, you know, all presidents are bad stance, and listen, I'm guilty of saying the same thing.
but to suggest that there's nothing with electoral politics. Electoral politics is not revolutionary, it's inherently incremental, but it is still something that speaks to a sizable portion of the population. We get this idea while we're online that everybody is on our level of political literacy, that everybody engages with policy and ideology the way that we do, and that is not the case. There are not people offline arguing over whether or not tankies should be allowed in leftist spaces, or, you know, all of this. We've gotten so insular that we assume our online leftist spaces are indicative of the greater voting public, and they most certainly are not. The majority of the voting public still thinks that socialism is some evil Red Scare nonsense that means breadlines and everybody is poor. They think that anarchism means the chaos and buildings burning down and godless heathens running the streets, killing people, you know, and burning crosses and lighting flags on fire. That's what they have in their mind, because that's what they've been conditioned to believe. And you have the option when you encounter that, and I hope this is what you take to heart. When you encounter that, you need to ask yourself, are you going to dismiss this person out of hand? And I'm not talking about engaging with Nazis, okay? You can dismiss a Nazi out of hand because their ideology is inherently flawed already, and they've made the choice to be a reactionary. But if you're talking to people who are not reactionaries, but instead mildly progressive or mildly center-left leaning, are you going to immediately dismiss them because they still engage with the concept of electoralism, or are you going to speak to them where they are? Anyway, I have a longer video coming out that covers a lot of this in the next couple days. I just really wanted to take time to engage with what I thought might be an issue that's bigger and more indicative of a larger problem on the online sphere. Well, thank you for watching. Stay tuned, I guess. You know, leave a comment if you like. I don't know.
This is also the first video where I showed my dogs, and naturally people lost their minds because I showed my dogs. And my dogs are adorable. I love them. They're my fur babies. Also screwed up the rolling credits. It took them a while to actually roll properly. It's okay, Starlight Crusader. Well, they're not credits. They are my wonderful Patreon contributors. Hallowed. Yes. Hallowed. Inquire within on how to become Hallowed, Square M Carrot. I think the Surfs shared this video, actually. And everybody lost it over the dogs. I think there were like 5 dogs outside at that time. Yeah, good times. Oh, well, wouldn't you like to know how I have so many dog? I have many dogs, and I watch dogs sometimes. Or we watch dogs, so that's why there's so many dog. So, that was That was honestly my last video for December. So, switch here. Everybody, thanks for joining me. Overall, I think I've improved in the videos that I've made, and I think that they have reached more and more people. Not too long ago, I broke 5,000 subscribers, as you can see if you're on my channel, and I don't show any signs of stopping. I really do appreciate all of you joining me this evening as I look back at, my first year of making content. I'm always open to suggestions. I do love getting feedback of any sort. And I just got to say that I think I benefit, while my fan base is really small, I benefit from an immensely positive viewer base. Immensely positive. Everybody who watches both the streams and people in the comments, it's always nothing but positive. And I really appreciate that. From the bottom of my heart, I really do. So here's to hoping 2021 brings us many more subscribers and brings us some even better videos going forward. I really do appreciate all of you watching. If I could just... Starlight Crusader, that is something I've strongly considered. As the great YouTuber Dan Olson has opined before, shooting cooking videos is hard. It's actually really hard to shoot them properly and not make them look disgusting. Shooting cooking videos is really tricky, excuse me. And so it's really tricky. Yeah, it's been a little over a year. It's been over a year, Roby. I started in May of last year, so I'm a little late on the year in review, a couple months late. But I started at the end. My first upload was at the end of May of last year. And so, but yeah, shooting cooking is very tricky. But I've thought about that, cooking on budget. I do cook a lot. I love cooking, actually. I really do. I love grilling. Some of you may have caught a grill stream that I did. It has been a wild year. We have to keep 2021 from winning, and we have to have our victory this year. So those of you watching on Twitch and those of you who can jump over to Twitch, stand by for the raid. We're going to raid into Universal Discourse, whoever is able to jump in. And to all of you still watching, thank you for joining me this evening, this late impromptu stream. I appreciate all of you. All right. Take care, comrades. Rest is resistance. Hydrate yourself. And please empower your communities. Take care.